Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of Wired In Live. I'm Cabot Phillips, coming to you live from Daily Wire HQ. We've got some major elections going on today, and polls are about to close, so we will be live for the next 2 hours. Count them. Not 1, but 2 hours, with up-to-the-minute results and commentary from experts on the ground in key battleground states. We're going to start in Kentucky, where Republican rabble-rouser Thomas Massie is fighting for his political life against a Trump-backed primary challenger. We'll then hear from Massie supporters and critics about what's at stake tonight. We'll also head to Georgia, where Republican voters will pick their candidates for Senate and governor. And then we'll pop down to Texas, where President Donald Trump just made an election-altering endorsement in the Senate primary there. We've also got a senator fighting to keep his seat in a battleground state joining us on the show. We're going to hear the latest from the White House and talk to a panel of economists about where things are heading this summer. Yeah, that's all in the next 2 hours. It's going to be a packed show. And as always, drop your questions in the chat for our live Q&A. I'm going to be getting to those throughout the program today. So if you're not a Daily Wire member, head over to dailywire.com/subscribe so you can join in on the fun. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you for commenting. But if you want to get your comments on the show, you got to go to dailywire.com. Please subscribe and join our mission over there. All right, we've got a big night ahead. Let's get things going. You know what time it is. Roll that graphic. And just a reminder, Wired In Live is now streaming live at 4 p.m. Eastern, Monday through Thursday. Get daily coverage of the news happening as it happens. Talk about why it matters and get insight from experts who are actually in the story, not just sitting around talking about it. Become a member right now and join our live chat over at dailywire.com/subscribe. All right, let's kick off tonight's big episode with the Daily Wire DC Bureau Chief Tim Rice, who's going to be popping back in and out throughout the evening. Tim, great to see you. It's going to be a fun night.
Absolutely, Cabot. I'm excited.
I don't believe you. You don't sound super excited, Tim. Come on, ramp it up a little bit, okay? Do it with me here.
Come on, I'm locked in. I'm excited. It's primary night in America. We got 6 races to watch. It's going to set us up for the midterms. I'm saving the good stuff for the back and forth.
Okay,
Come on, man.
I should have had faith. I got to trust the process, the Tim Rice process. Okay, so Tim, President Trump and his GOP allies, they have spent tens of millions of dollars trying to unseat Thomas Massie and elect Ed Gelrein. What is at stake for President Trump tonight?
Yeah, so tens of millions of dollars. Just want to stress again, I know we've said it on this show, we've covered it on dailywire.com. This is the most expensive House race in American history, which is kind of crazy. It's crazy that the Kentucky 4th, a humble but proud district, is now has drawn so much attention, and it is entirely because the president and his allies, as you said, have gotten involved. They want to get rid of Thomas Massie. Why? They want to get rid of Thomas Massie because he opposed the one big beautiful bill, the president's signature legislative accomplishment. He has been a leading Republican voice against the war in Iran from the beginning, and is he's an anti-war Republican, right? So he's sticking to his guns, but he's been a persistent thorn in the administration's side as they try to kind of get momentum on this. And he was a loud critic of, I say critic loosely there. He had a lot to say about how the administration handled the Epstein files. He's made some accusations about the president's involvement that are, probably pretty baseless. But, anyway, just on every level has been, kind of waging open war against the president and, as such, the Republican Party. So what's at stake for it's easy to see why the president would want him out. And Gelrein is just a kind of, a former Marine, MAGA, also, kind of a political outsider, someone without baggage, someone without, that much political capital, that much of a base of his own. So sort of a good loyal ally for the president who would probably remain that way. So what's at stake for the president? It's his political capital. He's been on a roll. He involved himself in the Louisiana Senate primary and made Bill Cassidy the first incumbent senator from either party to lose a primary since 2012. He's been effective in calling for other primary challenges. His endorsements still carry weight, which is something we're going to talk about later on. This has been the biggest one, right? This has been the fiercest battle. It's the one that the president cares the most about, clearly. Massie is the one giving it back to the president the most, right? Everyone else sort of tries to tell, I support President Trump, I vote with him. Massie's fighting with the president. We can talk more about that in a minute. So, Trump tried to get him out. Massie stood his ground.
Yeah.
If Massie wins, people are going to be rethinking the president's effectiveness into the midterms and through the remainder of his lame duck term. So the stakes are pretty huge for the president and his political machine.
Exactly. That is why so much is at stake here for President Trump. And I know a lot of folks at home might be saying, why does the Kentucky 4th Congressional District really matter that much? Because this will tell us a lot about President Trump's ability to influence some of these elections down ballot. Now, we talk about the amount of money that's being spent in this race. Thomas Massie had an extraordinary interview on Fox today where he pretty overtly said that it's him versus the Israel lobby. He repeatedly invoked Israel, saying, hey, we've got folks like Miriam Adelson that are spending all this money, and it's folks who support Israel and are mad at me about not doing the bidding of the Israelis and not supporting the Iran war. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
No, but wouldn't it be really funny if I was like, yeah, Thomas Massie's 100% correct. It's the Israel lobby. It's how to get him. No, it's not a fair assessment. He is, and again, I say this with all due respect, I have nothing but respect for the people of Kentucky's 4th Congressional District. But this is not a Senate race. This is a House race. This is not a House district that is really, it's pretty solidly red. That's another reason why the primary matters so much, right? Like, no one thinks the Democrat's going to win in this race. It's not that controversial. It's not that consequential. Thomas Massie is he's not like an incredible fundraiser. He's best known for being a firebrand on Twitter and against the president and in Washington. And the president is the president of the United States. And the Republican Party and the National Republican Congressional Committee are the Republican Party and the NRCC. This is what happens, right? I mean, this is truly what this is an instance of, if you come for the king, you best not miss. Thomas Massie is one guy with like a kind of small to mid political operation. He's not a guy who has designs on leadership in the future. It's not like he runs his own pack or, has sort of like this war chest that he's been sitting on for a future Speaker of the House race or things like that. He's a congressman. There's 436 of them, right? There's one president. There's one party apparatus. Those guys control the donors. Yeah, maybe some of them are Jewish. Maybe some of them support Israel. Most people in the Republican Party disagree with Thomas Massie on Israel. That's one of the issues. That doesn't mean he set himself up for he set himself a difficult table, and now he's saying the odds are stacked against me. You can't do that. That's not how it works. I mean, yeah, the odds are stacked against you, but not because of Israel, because you decided to take on your president and your party, kind of with just like yourself and Lauren Boebert in your corner, and now you want to cry conspiracy. That's just not what's happening here.
Yeah. And I do think that he has used that to motivate a lot of his supporters of saying, hey, I am kind of a one-man army. And he has used that. He's leaned into that fact, saying, hey, I don't have a lot of the big backing. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out with his base there in the 4th District of Kentucky. He said repeatedly, hey, I know every inch of this, every holler here in my district. I know my constituents. They're going to reelect me. And we will know here very shortly. Polls close in about 52 minutes.
52 minutes. And I'll just say one thing. It's interesting. And I think you raise a great point, which is that this is something that we're seeing as Republicans. They can't run with Trump, right? Going in this primary cycle and this midterm cycle because the president's not on the ballot. He'll never be on the ballot again. They're not Democrats, so they can't really run against Trump like as a full anti-Trump person. So, and there was a time, right, in the first Trump administration where Trump-aligned candidates could say, I'm an outsider like the president. I'm MAGA. I'm America first. These things are mainstream now. Trump is a 2-term president. J.D. Vance, one of the most America First MAGA members of the Senate, is the vice president of the United States, right? So how does a Republican who wants to run against Trump without running as a Democrat, who wants to say that they're America First and MAGA without ceding that ground to the president and the party, how do they make themselves seem like an outsider? They need a boogeyman. They need someone to define themselves in opposition to. And for Thomas Massie, that was Israel. Go figure.
Yeah, and I also think tonight will tell us a lot about how many of these issues that we see that are big online are actually big for average voters. There's no question that the Epstein scandal is huge online, and that a lot of folks in the GOP online are frustrated with President Trump's handling of unrolling these Epstein documents and things of that nature. We also know that opposition to the war in Iran and opposition to Israel, these are things that are very big online for a lot of folks on the right. We will see tonight, those are issues that Thomas Massie has largely campaigned on. We'll see how big those are for actual voters in the district. Now, Tim, while I have you, I want to get down to Texas, where President Trump made major waves in the primary there, finally offering his long-awaited endorsement in the Senate primary. Tell us about that.
That's right. So this has been the most hot before Thomas Massie's primary became the most hotly watched contest of the cycle. It was Senator John Cornyn versus Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. This has been a drag down blowout fight from the beginning. Cornyn, the I want to say 5-term senator, been in Washington for a long time. Was a contender for Senate Majority Leader when Mitch McConnell stepped down. Ken Paxton, very MAGA again, very America first, has been leading the charge as Attorney General of Texas on, suing companies for, gender and racial discrimination, blocking DEI, transgender radicalism, a lot of things that are very popular with the president's base. And the president finally today came out and endorsed Paxton. This is a huge boost for Ken Paxton because this is really a race where, look, John Cornyn is more of an insider than Ken Paxton. That is indisputable. Ken Paxton has never been more. He's been a Texas politician. John Cornyn has been in Washington for a long time. He's held leadership positions. But John Cornyn is pretty staunchly conservative. He votes with the president something like 96% of the time. Ken Paxton is a little bit more blustery, and I don't say that in a bad way. And as Attorney General, he's certainly had more of these opportunities to kind of like have big fights in a spotlight because that's what attorneys general do, whereas senators' jobs are somewhat different. But so this is a long way of saying that Trump's endorsement really mattered in this primary because when you control for the Cornyn loyalists and the Paxton rebels, there's a huge chunk of the voting bloc in Texas who really could have gone either way and really were looking to the president for guidance on this. So, I mean, the Cornyn camp is not happy. The Paxton camp is understandably thrilled. The runoff election is next Tuesday, I believe. We will see again. I mean, we'll see after tonight too, right? Just another test of whether the president's endorsement really is make or break.
Yeah, there were reports that a number of Senate Republicans and leadership on the Hill were not happy when this endorsement came out. They were very stoic and clearly, it seemed, wanting the endorsement to go to Cornyn. But we'll have more on that later. Tim, we're going to bring you back on. Again, we're about 48 minutes now from polls closing in Kentucky. We'll also get to the Georgia polls that are closing here in a bit, a little bit later on the show. But Tim Rice, Daily Wire DC Bureau Chief, thanks for coming on, man.
See you in a bit, Kevin.
Well, throughout the month, we have heard from White House officials, including on this program, making their case for why Thomas Massie should be voted out of office tonight. But there is no doubt, as we just talked about with Tim, the Kentucky Congressman still has a loyal contingent of followers who believe that he is what Washington needs more of. Joining us now to flesh out that point of view is Robbie Suave, senior editor at Reason and host of Rising on Hill TV. Robbie, great to have you back on.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So we had Senator Rand Paul on the program last week, and he made his case for Massie. I want to pose the same question to you that I gave to him. Why should Thomas Massie be reelected?
I'm sure mine is similar to Senator Paul's. Look, I don't know about you. I'm actually still a single-issue COVID voter. I'm worried that if something like that were to happen again, we would go through the exact same obnoxious and awful and authoritarian policies. And if that did happen, I wish we would have more people in Congress like Thomas Massie, who saw from the get-go how the government was about to violate our constitutional rights, our civil liberties, our free speech, our autonomy over our own bodies, shut down our businesses for indefinitely. And he saw it. And he knew that CARES Act was going to be a mistake because he actually reads legislation and he thinks through it and he votes from a principled, constitutional, libertarian standpoint. I want more people like that in Congress. I don't agree with every single thing he's ever done. I actually disagree with how the Epstein files has been handled. I think now that there are no scalps to claim at the end, there is no evidence that powerful people were protected by the Justice Department or whatever the claim was supposed to be. I regret how that was handled, so I disagree with him on that. But it's okay for me to disagree with someone on like 7% of the issues and still think Congress is a better place for them. The reasons people are giving, that the president is giving to have him out, is because he stuck to his guns on not expanding the federal debt, not getting involved in new wars, and not sending taxpayer dollars overseas in general. I think that's a good reason to retain him.
If Thomas Massie does win tonight, and it looks, some of the polls lately have him down 7 to 10 points. There are others that have him closer. We don't know. Congressional polling in these primary districts is very tough. If he does win, though, what sort of message do you think it sends to the National Republican Party?
I think it would send the message that, look, Donald Trump has wrought very serious changes to the Republican base, but we have to be cognizant of the fact that young Republicans in particular, some of the new people who came to MAGA, people of all different backgrounds, were in fact animated by his promise not to start new foreign wars, concerns about the debt and the deficit. I think older Republicans are more likely of a neoconservative agenda. And, and we can disagree on foreign policy. I've said on your program, I hope that Trump's gambit with Iran works out. I really do. I'm certainly not working against it or rooting against it. But I think it's important to have some members of Congress who say, look, energy prices, gas prices are my number one concern. I'm sorry. We got to vote on things. And that's Thomas Massie's energy. And it's very popular with young people who've joined the GOP. You got to give them something. The boomers are getting everything. Got to give them something. People like Thomas Massie know that. So I think a win for Massie would be a signal that the GOP is a big enough place to encompass different perspectives on some of these issues that matter to young people.
Now, Vice President Vance weighed in on this race earlier today from the White House. He said, quote, "You have got to serve the people who sent you," referring to the fact that Massie's district voted for President Trump by a 36-point margin in 2024. What do you make of that argument that, hey, his voters want him supporting Trump, and if he's not doing that anymore, he shouldn't be there?
Well, he still backs up Trump on a wide variety of issues. Massie is not someone like an Adam Kinzinger or a Liz Cheney who made their whole personality going after Trump for how Trump behaves as president or dubious legal efforts or things of that nature. Yes, there's no room for that in the coalition. If you're a Republican, you stand with Trump. But that's not Massie. Massie's differences with him, and they are not, again, they're not across the board, are on issues that Trump ran on. Trump ran on saying no new wars. Republicans, my entire adult life, have ran on balancing the budget, not spending recklessly, not taxing more. So the big, beautiful bill was opposed by Elon Musk, who is Trump's biggest, most powerful, most important donor and supporter. So Massie voted along those lines. You can't say, I don't think, that he's some anti-Trump perspective. It's not personal for Massie. Trump is making it. Trump's the one making it personal. And why? Why spend more money than has ever been spent in a congressional primary to get out one person who actually reads the bills and provides some pushback within the coalition, still there when you need it? It seems needless and frankly petty on the president's part, not on Massie's part. And I wouldn't say that about some of these other Republicans where they did make it personal. It was unnecessary.
Robbie, one of the lines we've heard from Massie critics, including folks at the White House, this week they've been saying, hey, look at who wants him to win. They say there's a reason that far-left Democrats are cheering him on, and it's because they know that he's a thorn in the GOP side. The Democrats know with how thin the GOP majority is right now, you got to have every single vote, people working together in this coalition. And the Democrats want him to win because they want him to continue voting against the president. What do you make of that claim?
I mean, look, fair enough, I guess, if you really think that I have disagreed with Massie, as I said, on the Epstein files, and him and Ro Khanna worked together on that, and I'm not actually appreciative of that effort. But on other things, I think he's an important no vote. And look, if they can't muster, they're going to lose. They're in danger of losing the House majority. After today's news, they could lose the Senate majority. Like, where it's not, nobody's playing it safe in Texas. So why does it matter here if they're not playing that game anywhere else? I think you can always score points by saying, oh, but look, this person got some praise. I mean, the kind of praise Massie gets from Democrats is mostly for being good on a couple civil liberties and foreign policy issues, sometimes on things Republicans said they wanted to do. Again, Massie has called attention to warrantless spying and FISA and all those kinds of things Trump and other Republicans were furious about when Republicans were the target, and yet they vote to go along with it again every single time. Again, I think it's useful useful to have someone like that in the coalition.
I want to get your take on the dynamic of Trump and his past endorsements of Thomas Massie and the Massie campaign seemingly leaning into that. I mean, today, his campaign sent a text to voters with an endorsement from Donald Trump calling him a conservative warrior and first-rate defender of the Constitution, I believe was the term. But that quote was from 2022. Do you think it was him trolling the president, saying, hey, look, back in 2022, he liked me, but he doesn't like me anymore because, he's changed, I haven't? Or do you think that he wanted his voters in his district to think that Trump still endorses him?
No, I think the voters are smarter than that. I think they'll see through it. No, I think it was a cute reminder that Trump was with him then, has been with him in the past. Again, his votes have lined up with Trump something like 90% of the time. I think this year maybe it was a bit less. But he has been a person in solid standing, and he has not changed. Trump is not doing. You can say, okay, I support it now, and he's persuaded me that it should be done differently. But Massie is voting along those lines. And again, even if you are supportive of what we're doing on our foreign policy, I still come back to the need for Congress to have a role in authorizing these things, which is a fight that Massie has picked and Rand Paul has picked. And you get less open-ended, confusing commitments if you have Congress vote on things. And if you don't have the majority you need to do them, then you have to make the case to the voters to give you more of a majority. And I don't think voters are going to give Republicans more of a majority after this second Trump term, which is unfortunate because there was an opportunity to get a lot of legislation done and to do. I was wildly in support of the DOJ cuts. That was great. I wish more had been done legislatively to make them permanent. Democrats are going to filibuster, vote against it, do whatever, then call them out, make them do that, and then say this is why we need fewer Democrats. There's a kind of shortcut Trump likes to take where he just declares it and expects everyone to get in line, but we have a role for our Congress to play.
20 seconds. Let's get your prediction for tonight. What happens?
I perpetually expect to be disappointed, always, and my predictions are usually wrong, so I'm fully prepared for him to lose.
As a Dallas Cowboys fan, I can relate to that, always waiting to be let down. Robbie Suave from Reason and Hill Rising, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate you providing the case.
My pleasure.
All right, as inflation and gas prices continue to rise amid the ongoing war in Iran, the economy remains the top issue for voters nationwide. President Trump is urging patience, saying he's confident prices will come down once the war concludes. But GOP candidates are getting antsy with midterms less than 6 months away. Here to help us break it all down are E.J. Antoni, chief economist at the Heritage Foundation, and Stephen Moore, economist, author, and commentator. Gentlemen, a pleasure to have you both. Steve, I want to start with a big picture question. Inflation, it's now accelerating at its fastest pace in 3 years. Gas prices are $4.50 nationally. How concerned should we be? How concerned are you?
Well, I think everybody's concerned about it. And when you see inflation running at 3.5% to 4%, that's not something any of us want to see. I'm very, very confident that the new Fed chairman, Kevin Warsh, is going to be absolutely fantastic. He's going to be an inflation hawk. And we're going to see those inflation rates dip back down to below 2%, which is where we want them. So short term, I'm very concerned. Long term, I think Trump has made one of his best picks ever in Kevin Warsh, and we will make the dollar as good as gold again.
EJ, do you agree with that optimism regarding Warsh? And what sort of steps can he take, in your view, to really address inflation and get it under control?
I think Steve is just spot on with Kevin Warsh. He's a fabulous pick. And actually, Steve and I have had the pleasure of being able to chat about monetary policy with the new Fed chairman. So I would say A+ there again in terms of what a great pick. Long run, that's a very, very good sign. Obviously, in the short run, we have a big problem with oil markets right now, with losing a fifth of the world's oil supply. And while we have been able to mostly mitigate the impact from that by doing things like releasing oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, and countries around the world have been releasing their own reserves as well, we have to remember that once the supply shock is over, once the strait gets opened, you are going to replace the supply shock with the demand shock. All of those reserves that we've been bleeding through in order to, again, minimize the impact right now, those reserves are going to have to be refilled. So yes, supply will go up, but demand is going to go up as well. That means you're not going to immediately see prices come all the way back down to pre-war levels. It's definitely going to take some time. It's also a great opportunity, though, for us to increase domestic production and to really help answer that call and assert not just energy independence, but true energy dominance.
On the war in Iran, Steve, last week, President Trump was asked about Iran negotiations and the impact on the economy. He responded with that clip we've all seen now saying, I don't think about Americans' financial situation. I don't think about anybody. I think about one thing. We cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon. How do you interpret that message? Do you believe he really means that? Or was this just, in your view, posturing towards Iran?
That's hard to say. I'm not in his head, so I don't know exactly, what he's thinking right now on this. But look, EJ put it well. There's no shortage of oil in the world. In fact, the world is awash in oil. And so as long as you get the Strait open, and whether that's 3 days or 3 weeks or 3 months, none of us know, there'll be this bump in the road, I think, will be solved. I think you look at all of other Trump's policies, the tax cuts, the pro-America energy policies, the deregulation, the draining of the swamp, those are all very positive for the economy. So I remain kind of short-term nervous and long-term very bullish.
EJ, I want to get to Treasury yields. The 30-year U.S. Treasury yield today hit 5.17%. That's the highest level since 2007. I think a lot of folks, when they hear terms like that, their eyes kind of gloss over. So can you just explain for our audience what that means for folks at home?
Sure. The very quick and dirty version of it is simply the fact that the Treasury is paying more interest in order to borrow money. And the reason that's so important is twofold. Number one, we just crossed back over $39 trillion in debt. So the interest rate we're having to pay on that debt is incredibly important. Now, obviously, we're talking about only portions of the debt. When we hear about a particular Treasury auction, for example, that's not all of the debt. That's just on the run or freshly issued debt. However, again, it's not good to see those interest rates moving up because that means we're going to be paying even more on the debt. We're already paying well over $1.2 trillion annually just to finance the debt, not pay it down, but just to service the debt. So that's the first point. The second thing that is just as important for consumers is this. Many private market interest rates are actually based off of certain Treasury yields, whether that's the 30-year bond, whether it's the 10-year Treasury note. Again, a lot of interest rates that you and I and all the listeners pay, whether that's for a mortgage, a credit card, student loan, auto loan, you name it, those things are based either explicitly or implicitly off these Treasury rates. So higher Treasury yields oftentimes mean that consumers end up paying more in financing costs as well.
That was exactly what I was wanting you to do, EJ. That was a perfect explanation. Steve, despite some of the economic headwinds this year, which there have been plenty of, and that is reflected in a lot of the polling numbers and consumer sentiment, the stock market has continued to climb. It was down a bit this week, but we've still seen record high after record high. Can you explain what's driving that growth despite some of the other sectors where we've seen some concerning numbers?
No, I'm shocked about it too. It's been an amazing bull market run. As you just said, we have an all-time high at the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ and near a all-time high with the Dow. It just shows that America is the financially dominant country. We have completely dominated the tech sector. 9 of the top 10 technology companies are based here in the United States. It's something that makes you proud to be an American. And I would just say this, the most important thing with respect to our industry, the most important thing right now is making sure that just as America dominated the internet age with great companies like Google and Apple and Amazon, I could go on and on, we have to dominate the AI age. And this is a scary moment because there's a real revolt among a lot of voters against AI and data centers. And that could really jeopardize our opportunity to dominate this industry. And if we don't, who will. It will be China.
EJ, I want to get to the housing market before we go. I love following your commentary on X about all things housing. It seems there's a growing sentiment that prices are going to come down once interest rates dip. You've expressed some skepticism there. Do you think people are kind of just taking it for granted that interest rates are going to come down soon?
I think so, absolutely. And the Treasury market might be telling us exactly that. In other words, that interest rates are not going to come down, at least not very soon. And obviously, there's a lot that Kevin Warsh can do there to help both tame inflation and try to bring interest rates down. But the fact of the matter is, when you have a government that is borrowing trillions of dollars a year, that's a lot of pressure on the loanable funds market. In other words, that's going to put some upward pressure on interest rates. The real solution at the end of the day, if you want to unfreeze, if you want to thaw out this frozen housing market, The real solution is actually to get government spending down. The less they spend, the less they borrow, and the less pressure there is on loanable funds. In other words, a bank, instead of loaning the treasury money to spend, can loan it to you and me and other folks to get a 30-year mortgage, for example. Or again, could be a student loan, an auto loan, you name it. But I think people are unfortunately rushing to the conclusion that interest rates are going to drop very, very soon. Let's not forget, just if I can close with this, that when Jerome Powell cut interest rates right before the election, which I think was borderline election interference, but he did that. He cut 100 basis points off the key Federal Reserve interest rate. But what happened to private market interest rates? They didn't go down. They went up about 100 basis points, whether that's the 30-year mortgage or whether you're looking at treasury markets. Just because the Fed adjusts a single policy tool, just because they turn one dial, does not mean the whole private market is going to follow lockstep.
Fascinating stuff. Gentlemen, really appreciate your time. EJ and Tony, Stephen Moore, you guys are welcome back anytime.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, guys, if you're watching Wired In live on the Daily Wire Plus app, thank you. If not, if you're over on YouTube, that is where you should be. You got to get the app. That is how you get push alerts when we go live, breaking news as it happens, and the latest from our outstanding investigative reporting team. The Daily Wire Plus app is free and available now on the App Store, Google Play, Apple TV, Roku, Samsung, LG, and more. All right, we've been talking all about midterms. So let's jump over to Capitol Hill to hear from a Republican senator fighting to maintain the Republican majority. It's Senator Jon Husted from the great state of Ohio. Senator, thanks so much for coming on.
Great to be with you.
Senator, we've seen a number of high-profile reports this year detailing massive fraud schemes nationwide. And this week, you are proposing new legislation to crack down on criminals who you say are exploiting student aid fraud. You call them ghost students. Tell us a little bit about this scheme.
Yeah, well, you know, people can apply for a student loan, a grant, things of that nature. And what's happening is that the scammers, the organized crime operations that we exist in this country, is they're stealing information, they're applying in a student's name, and then the money goes out the door to the bank account, and then poof, it's gone. There's no student, no one ever shows up. It's just a scam. And we've seen this happen in many cases, saw it during COVID with the unemployment compensation system. And we're trying to stop it because stealing is wrong. Fraud is wrong. We know it's happening, but we've got to do something about it. We can't just say, oh, it's a problem, so we're going to require the Department of Education. By the way, Linda McMahon, who, you know, has been leading on this, we need to get this done. And I don't know, I mean, just no one during the Biden administration really paid attention to it. It was a problem. It was a scam. Everyone knew it. We know that there are certain schools where the scams are more likely to happen because they're doing less oversight. So we need not only the schools to do oversight, we need the U.S. Department of Education to enhance its oversight so we can stop people from stealing from our education system.
Just how prevalent is fraud in this system? Are we talking about millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars? Do we have any way of knowing?
It's when I talk to Secretary McMahon, she thinks it's in the billions of dollars that we're talking about here. So it's a real problem.
Now, on the topic of fraud, our investigative reporter here at Daily Wire, Luke Rosiak, broke a story this month highlighting what appears to be a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme targeting the Medicaid system in your home state of Ohio. What can be done at the federal level to make sure that fraudsters are not stealing money from this system in Ohio and all around the country? Because we know it's happening everywhere.
Yeah, both the federal and the federal and the state governments have a responsibility in this. The state government is the administrator. They administer the program, so that they have to do the checks. And look, you can use technology to see, hey, is there an overutilization in a zip code? Is there an overutilization by a certain provider? Do they have the proper checks? You can do that at the local level. That I understand Governor DeWine has announced that the state of Ohio is doing, even though in Minneapolis and Minnesota and California, they didn't seem to care. Governor DeWine's taking it serious in Ohio. That's one of the ways you can do it. But at the federal level, we did this in the working family tax cut plan. And I want to this help you and your listeners understand about how the Democrats cast this. In the working family tax cut plan, we said, okay, we're going to require states to more frequently check the eligibility of people on Medicaid. Why? Because we know when they do that you see a drop in the number of people on Medicaid. Why? Because they're not eligible to be on Medicaid. And so you know what happens? The Congressional Budget Office, when you eliminate fraud, they actually reduce the amount of money that they score you for how much you're going to spend on Medicaid, and the Democrats called that a cut. Okay, they said we're cutting Medicaid because we're eliminating fraud. That's the difference between how they view this and how we view this. We put a provision in there. We're requiring the states to do this. You're going to see, and you're already seeing a drop in the number of quote people on Medicaid. Well, it's not people that deserve Medicaid. It's people who are illegally on Medicaid that are not eligible for Medicaid. You're seeing that number drop, and that's how you eliminate fraud. You actually hold people accountable.
And we've also seen similar messaging from the left when it came to President Trump's efforts at reforming SNAP, and they were removing a number of folks from the food stamp program who did not qualify or were abusing the system. And as you mentioned, many of your Democratic colleagues were lamenting that fact, saying that it was President Trump stealing food from folks who needed it when that was a scam.
We just don't want the taxpayers to be stolen from. Look, we have a compassionate nation. If you're in need, if you're poor and in need for food or Medicaid, we want you to have it. Like we want to help people who are truly in need, but we don't want scammers. We don't want people who are bilking the system for billions of dollars to continue to do that, enabled by governments like you see in California that are using it to fund the healthcare costs of people who are in this country illegally. Can't have that. You undermine public trust in government and in these programs. We're trying to preserve Medicaid. We're trying to preserve home health care. We're trying to preserve food assistance. And you do that by eliminating the fraud.
Senator, switching gears.
You eliminate the fraud, you put more money in the hands of people who truly deserve it.
It should be a message you would like to see both parties getting behind. Unfortunately, it seems it's only one at this point. Now, switching gears, you've also proposed a constitutional amendment that would require a balanced federal budget. I think a lot of Americans hear that and they say, wait, is that not on the books already? Why would that not be on the books? So tell us more about that effort and the pushback you've received.
Yeah, well, I come from state government. I'm not a creature of Washington. I'm an Ohio guy. I've been in state government. We had to balance the budget every year because our constitutions required it. So it just is a shift in mindset. When you know you have to balance the budget, then you say, okay, this is how much revenue I have. This is how much I can spend. If I want to cut taxes, I have to reduce, our expenditures. And you do that every year. And in Ohio, we did that over the course of 20 years and cut our top income tax rate from 7.25% to now a flat 2.75%. We did that by balancing the budget because we had a constitutional requirement to do so. At the federal level, no one thinks like that. No one thinks like, hey, I have to balance the budget because, well, they're not required to do so. And I just don't believe that the federal government is ever going to get spending under control and preserve our fiscal futures until we have a constitutional amendment. It's just what I learned here in being be here only a year. No one talks like that. And so I want a constitutional amendment to get it done because states do it, the federal government can too.
I need to bring you to Target with my 2.5-year-old son because he does not seem to understand that our family has a budget also, and he just wants me to buy every single toy for him. And I try and tell him, hey,
it's the same concept.
Exactly.
Same concept. Just put it on the credit card, right?
Yeah, and just let someone else pay for it.
I mean, it's the same concept that your 2-year-old has is the same concept that the federal government has, and I'm trying to change that mentality.
Senator, I want to get to another topic that you have been pushing on. Last month, we know there was a deal reached in the Senate and House to renew HHS funding for large portions of the department, but Democrats are still fighting to prevent full funding for ICE and Border Patrol. What are you and your colleagues in the Senate doing to ensure that that funding does ultimately go through?
Well, I want to tell you something. We're for the concept of following the law and enforcing the rule of law. Okay, that's pretty simple. That's a basic thing that Americans should count on us doing. But the Democrats don't want federal law enforcement to do their jobs. They don't want to protect the border, and they don't want to deport people who've committed crimes and are in this country illegally. That's what we're trying to fund, the people that do that, to keep our homeland safe, to make your neighborhood safe, to stop the fentanyl, to stop the human trafficking. We're trying to fund that because Democrats have refused to fund federal law enforcement. We are trying to fund the Department of Homeland Security, protect our borders, deport people who've committed crimes. Look, there isn't a week that goes by that you don't see a murder of someone by someone who's illegally in this country. Republicans are trying to enforce the rule of law, and we're going to have a vote here very soon to try to do that. We're going to use a reconciliation process to do it, which only requires 50 votes, but really limits what we can do with that money because the Democrats will not go along with this. Not a single vote can we get to support federal law enforcement and enforcing the rule of law.
We're going to keep a very close eye on that reconciliation package as it works its way through. Senator, I have to ask you about the story that's been dominating the Hill today. President Trump endorsing Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton over your Senate colleague John Cornyn. Your reaction?
Well, we'll find out. I mean, look, John Cornyn's a really good man. I do not know Attorney General Paxton. I know John Cornyn's a good man who's served Texas well, and I know the president's endorsed in the other direction, but they still have an election next Tuesday, and we'll see what happens. But either way, Republicans will win the U.S. Senate seat in Texas.
And you're hoping to play a part in preserving that GOP majority. Before we go, tell us about your race this November and what you view as being at stake in Ohio.
Well, I think that the future of my state and the nation, I feel a big responsibility because I'm running against former Senator Sherrod Brown, who was in Congress for 32 years. And during that time, he supported policies that drove up energy costs, that drove up healthcare costs, that sent our jobs to China. And in 32 years, he created all the problems that we face today. And I'm trying to fix those things. But he's abandoned the state of Ohio for a radical left-wing agenda. He's just too liberal for Ohio. And I need to win. I need to win not just for the sake of Ohio, but for the sake of the country, because we can't have another radical who's going to support the radical left-wing agenda. We can't have another person from Ohio enlisted in that army. We have to have somebody who will fight for Ohio, put Ohio first, and fight for the working families of our state. And that's me. That's what the Jon Husted agenda is about.
Well, our audience is going to hear a lot more about your race. It's one of the most important campaigns coming up this November. We really appreciate your time. We know you have a lot going on. Senator Husted, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
All right, guys, it is election season. We've got polls closing in Kentucky in 18 minutes. We're going to get those votes coming in very shortly. I'm starting to get that excitement as a political nerd. I know a lot of you at home feel the same way, but given that it's election season, it means I get to talk to my favorite pollster basically whenever I want. So I'm a very happy man. So let's bring in Brent Buchanan, founder and CEO of Signal Polling. Brent, great to have you back.
Hey, Cabot.
Now, you guys just posted your latest polling report over at Signal for the month of May. You combed through these numbers very carefully, but what was jumping out to you the most?
Well, in that general election survey, one of the things that stuck out to me the most was how bad the direction of the country has gotten among voters. And a lot of the shift between April and May, a negative shift, has actually been among the strongest Republicans. And so that's something that I'm beginning to keep my eyes on are what are the people who are the base of the Republican Party feeling? Now, they're still 100% with the Republicans on the generic ballot come November, and they still feel very strongly to the positive about President Trump. And then we have another group of people who call themselves mostly Republicans, and a third of them are saying that they don't vote at all based on what Donald Trump is doing. And so it's really, we've got a unique challenge on our side of the aisle going into November where the left is very unified and our side of the party is not. And I think you're kind of seeing some of that play out in the primaries that we're going to see here in, as you mentioned, 16 minutes from now and starting in Kentucky.
Now, among that contingent of Republicans who are what you'd call MAGA folks who say that they are now concerned with the direction of the country, In your numbers, did that coincide with a dip in voter enthusiasm or a likelihood to actually get up and vote in the midterms?
We do trail Democrats a little bit in how interested or enthusiastic we are about the upcoming election. But I have voted in many elections myself where I was not excited, and I still voted anyways. And so it's not a great indicator. What I'm more interested in is our base aligned around our candidates, less so than are they excited about our candidates. Because I wrote in my book, America's Emotional Divide, that the number one driver of voter turnout is anger. And the left is very angry about Donald Trump. And so as Senator Husted was just talking about, things like waste, fraud, and abuse are topics that we have to talk about as Republicans, because we have to let our base know what's at stake. If the Democrats are elected, that they're going to continue that. They use that to fund their efforts. I think it's pretty amazing that there's been no left-wing governments in Latin America elected since we got rid of USAID. Just magically, all the right-wing governments start winning.
On that topic of what Republicans should be leaning into, you mentioned waste, fraud, and abuse. In your polling, what's jumping out to you as issues that GOP lawmakers should be leaning into that will resonate with independents and moderates?
A lot of it is the issues where we can contrast with a very radical view of where the left is. One of those is immigration, where we believe in the rule of law. We believe that a border means you don't cross it. And if you do, you illegally came here and you will be deported. If you commit a crime, we will put you in jail. And if you committed a crime as an illegal, we will send you home. And those are very basic common sense things. They're 80-20 issues. Where somehow the Democrats find themselves on the 20% side of an issue. I also believe that there are some topics that are going to come up between now and the end of the election that we're not even talking about today, but they're going to let voters know that you may not be happy with everything that has gone on since Republicans have been in charge, but the left being in charge is a much greater risk.
You talk about those 80-20 issues that you'd like to see Republicans lean into. What are the issues that they should stay away from, or if not stay away from, that they should think very carefully about how they message them? Because right now you think that they're not working with voters.
It's not an 80-20 issue. It's probably 100%. It touches everybody as an issue, but it is the cost of living and the rising cost of just getting by, whether it's healthcare or groceries, gas, childcare. It's expensive, and wages have not necessarily kept up with those increasing costs. And no voter, because I do tons of focus groups, no voter is expecting that all of a sudden tomorrow everything's going to be half the cost. They know that's not how the economy works. And what they're looking for is somebody who is empathetic to what they're going through. They don't want to be gaslit. That was one of the big errors of Joe Biden, was saying, look, the economy is working. It's working well. It's getting better. Meanwhile, they had 20% increase in the cost of everything. So don't gaslight Americans, empathize with them. But we also have to have a plan. I think that is probably the third leg of the stool for Republicans being reelected to control the House and the Senate, is we have to tell people what the plan is to curb this increasing cost of everything.
And as we've talked about on the show in the past, there also have to be signature pieces of legislation to point to. In your polling, has the Big Beautiful Bill been an impactful driver in bringing people to support Republicans? Or at this point, is it too far in the past where people aren't really thinking about it anymore?
It's too far in the past. First off, calling it that was a challenge. And how do we message this? It could be a beautiful bill about anything. I wish we'd called it the working family tax cuts from the beginning. However, it does give us an opportunity to contrast, especially when we're running against Democrats who voted no on that bill, where you can point to voters in Michigan, for example, if Haley Stevens ends up being the Democratic nominee and Mike Rogers is running against her as the Republican, that's a great issue to bring up. Haley Stevens voted for your taxes to be increased by $2,000 a year. She voted against seniors having more deductions on their taxes. That gives us a contrast wedge issue, but it really only works if, one, we put ad dollars behind it, but two, we've got to be running against folks who voted no on it, the Democrat side.
Brent, I was reading through the latest data on your site, and I was floored by a demographic gap that you note between married men and unmarried women. Tell us a little bit more about those numbers.
It's shocking. So I try to remember exactly which point that was, but I remember that it was single women Democrat plus 55, I believe, on the generic ballot, and married men Republican plus 22 on the generic ballot. And what's fascinating is that there is not much room delta between married women and married men, and then you've got unmarried men, and then unmarried women are just radically on the opposite side of literally every issue. And that demographic tracks very closely with other things, like we've asked about political violence in the past. Is it okay to break the law, essentially, if you disagree with what your government is doing? And that demographic, single women, is always the one who looks different than the rest of the entire country.
Brent, I know making predictions can be tough, but what do you expect to see tonight in the Kentucky primary in the 4th District?
Well, I believe if the stat is correct that I saw, that it is the most expensive primary on any side of the aisle ever in history. $32 million spent in that race. That is an insane amount of money to be dumped on a poor little congressional district in Kentucky. So when that much money is being spent, almost anything can happen, because we have done studies in the past in races that we've been involved with where you can track spending to turnout. And the more that is spent, the more people turn out in these primaries. So I would assume that at the end of the day, in Kentucky specifically, that Massie probably loses, but he's also had people come at him in the past. And if he pulled it out, I wouldn't be shocked either.
Yeah. One of the other issues that you've been tracking over at Signal Polling, I'd encourage everyone, go check out Signal, CYGNAL. They have just fantastic reports every single month open to the public. And you guys have been tracking voter sentiment on socialism and communism, specifically on the left, which is especially important given the rise of Zohran Mamdani and AOC. Based on your polling, just how popular are those ideologies right now among the left?
Yeah, it's wild. You've got a majority of Democrats, I want to say the number's around 58% of Democrats, that believe that socialism as a economic system is best poised to deliver the greatest outcomes for the most amount of Americans. It was just how we phrased it. So we also asked about capitalism. We phrased it as the free market, because we believed that actually would perform better than capitalism, which it did among voters, but not among Democrats. And then you even have 31% of young liberals who believe that communism is the economic system that will deliver best from the greatest number of Americans. And these are the people voting in their primaries. So when we look at the types of people who are running, how does a Zohran Mamdani get elected in New York City? The DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, that he is part of, that are a branch of the Democratic Party, are running 750 candidates right now in Democratic primaries. And I'm considering putting it on my prayer list, if God cared about politics at this level, that I hope every one of them wins their primaries.
Yeah. Well, there is another Democratic Socialist of America candidate running in Pennsylvania today in a primary on the Democratic side as well. So there might be even more candidates. And as your polling has pointed out, this is no longer a fringe topic. Embracing communism, embracing socialism, it is not a fringe topic. It's not just online. We're seeing it now trickle into more and more minds of folks on the left. Brent Buchanan from Signal Polling, always appreciate your insight. Thanks so much for coming on.
Hey, thank you, Cabot.
All right, guys, we are now just 7 minutes away from polls closing in Kentucky, where we will find out whether Congressman Thomas Massie has been able to fend off a strong primary challenge from Ed Galrein, who has been backed by President Trump. So stay tuned. Those results should come in fairly quickly. It's not a huge district, so we will be getting you those numbers right as they trickle in. But for now, let's bring things back home to the great state of Tennessee, where Daily Wire reporter Lyndon Blake is out in Nashville. And here in Nashville, we had a big announcement today. Lyndon, tell us first where you are and what's going on.
Okay, well, I just had to come see the new Nissan Stadium and check the process, because it needs to be done by 2030, because the Super Bowl is coming to town. That is the big news today. Nashville hosting the 2030 Super Bowl. And the stadium, it had to be built to make this happen. I'm going to flip the camera so you can see before I tell you a little bit about it. So there's the old Nissan Stadium there on the left of your screen. There's the new Nissan Stadium. You can see it is way bigger, a lot of glass, and it can be closed in. That was a big deal. Get the new stadium, and the Super Bowl committee unanimously voted today to bring it to Nashville. Now, the stadium is set to be completed by next season, the 2027 season. So I was kind of joking about having it be ready by 2030. It'll for sure be ready by 2030, as well as a lot of other construction that's happening around the stadium. I'm sure there'll be some new things, some new hotels, some new just areas of town, parts of town that is going to be cleaned up as you welcome the football world to Nashville. But, you know, Cabot, it's very interesting. Why does the stadium have to be closed to host the Super Bowl? The last time it was outside was 5 years ago in 2021, but that was down in Tampa. And Tampa in February is almost guaranteed not to rain. The last time it was in a cold weather climate, outside I'm talking about, was back in 2014. So the trends lately is, you know, taking to these new stadiums that have the ability to put the roof up because you can't delay the Super Bowl.
Look at us, little old Nashville getting the Super Bowl. We're going to have a lot of folks in our audience who are going to be traveling down to see that beautiful stadium for, there's been rumblings of the Final Four. There's been all sorts of events that are going to be hosted now. Now, on the topic of the NFL, we've got to throw a bone to our sports fans, myself included. NFL owners just made a new vote on international games. Tell us about that.
I'm so disappointed. I want to give my opinion really quick. I think it is absurd that we keep giving more and more games international. Now they just approved today that there will be 10 international games. And I think the record's happening this year. I think it's going to be 9. They were slated 8 games. So this is not per team. I don't think that, you know, your teams move into Dublin. Not yet, at least. But 10 international games. And what made me the most mad was last year, if you remember, we opened the games in South America. And so you have the first NFL game of the season, and you're not even hearing our national anthem here in America. You're hearing in different countries. And doing 1 a year, 2 a year, that's cool. You know, giving it new experience, but it's making it unattainable for the average NFL fan to go support their team. And then they also got rid of this thing where you could protect home games from being international games. 2 home games are protected. They got rid of that too. So say you're Tennessee, say you're the Titans, and you're hosting a huge rival, and you're like, no, do not take that October 3rd game and put it in Japan or Australia or anywhere. You can't do that anymore. And so it's just really, it's disheartening. And I don't know who is a fan. I cannot tell you, besides the NFL getting all this money from other countries and just expanding the brand internationally, no football fan that I know is loving this.
Well, you just answered
the teams in our stadium.
You just answered the question of who's a fan. It's Commissioner Roger Goodell. We know he's a fan of making money, and he has had his sights set on international markets for quite a while now. So the capitalist in me says, hey, I understand there's a lot of fans over in Europe and a lot of fans in South America. We know they want to grow the game. But also, as the American in me, I say, hey, we already export enough stuff to the rest of the world. Let us keep football for ourselves. And if we start to give an inch, if we start to say, yeah, my Dallas Cowboys, they can go play the Baltimore Ravens down in Brazil, which is happening this year, week 3. If we start to give an inch on that, they're going to take a mile. And eventually there will be, mark my words, a Super Bowl in London. And at that point, look, we already fought a war so that we didn't have to be intertwined with the great people of England. I will fight another war if it means keeping the Super Bowl here in the United States. But I digress. Lyndon, I want to get to another topic because that stadium behind you, it's also going to play host to a number of massive country music concerts. And there's a story that I absolutely love involving country star Eric Church. I know you love following country music. He gave a commencement address. I want to play that clip, and then I want to get your take on it. Let's roll the tape there.
I want to start with a sound. You know this sound. It's a guitar that's out of tune. Something that almost gets there, that tries, but doesn't. And some ancient, honest part of your brain knows it immediately. You don't need training to hear it. You just know. That sound is the sound of something beautiful that has not been tended to. 6 strings. When all six are in tune, the chords they make can stop a conversation cold, carry a broken person through the worst night of their life, or make a room full of strangers feel for 3 minutes like they've known each other forever. But if even one is off, the whole chord unravels. Not gradually, not politely. The moment you strike it, you know. I believe your life runs on this principle. And I'm going to break it down for you right now and tell you about your strings, okay? String one, the low E, that is your foundation. The low E is the thickest string. It is the heaviest. Every chord a guitar can make rests on this string being in tune. Your faith is the low E of your life. The thing that sits at the very bottom of you. Your belief about what this life is for, what you owe, what holds the universe together when science reaches the edge of its own explanation and shrugs. The people who tend to their faith in ordinary seasons do not come undone in extraordinary ones. They still hurt. They still sit in hospital waiting rooms asking unanswerable questions at 3 a.m, but they have a foundation to return to. The world will try to untune this string through busyness, through slow accumulation of a full schedule, a full inbox, a full life. Listen to me. Tend to your faith, not just when you're broken, but when you're whole.
Look at that.
I want to start with a
I'm
sound.
getting a little misty-eyed right
this-
now. Lyndon, what do we think?
I cried when I heard it the first time, and I obviously knew what he was going to say this time, and I still got choked up. I'm thinking, Cabot, this is one of those speeches that I will show my kids one day, because he was able to put the big, scary adult world into such simple terms for these college graduates. And I loved how he led with faith. He talked about family. He talked about how important it is to find your spouse, because your spouse will help you with every other aspect of life. He talked about finding good community, having ambition, and then just following your dreams. In the way he did it with the guitar, because you heard it when it was out of tune. You don't have to be a musician to be like, ooh, that sounded bad. And people can tell when something's wrong in your friends or family's life, when something's not in tune. So I love Eric Church. The Chief, I was just, admiring his bar. You can't see it because the building on Broadway, a minute ago, Chiefs. And I'm just so proud that speech is getting the attention that it deserves, because college can be such a place where your good morals are suppressed. And he just brought it to the light. He just, put it out there for the world. And he played Carolina for the UNC grads after that speech. So they got a concert too.
I would like to think that even old curmudgeon-y souls like Bill Belichick were down at the UNC commencement shedding a single tear. Lyndon, Blake, thank you so much for joining us, giving us the update on the Titan Stadium.
Bill Belichick's girlfriend dancing in my head, Cabot. Now that's all I can think
I
about is her
apologize
doing her
to
cheer
you
routine at graduation.
and our entire audience. All right, Lyndon, thanks for coming on.
Thanks, guys.
All right, you heard it here first. Nashville, Tennessee, home to the Super Bowl. We got the update on the new stadium being built right there. Guys, polls have just closed in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So we've got some new results that are going to be coming in now any moment. So stay tuned. We're going to have those results as they start to trickle in. And as we wait for the votes to be counted, let's get back to D.C., where we've got D.C. Bureau Chief Tim Rice standing by. Tim, in just a few hours, we're either going to have a very happy or very angry President Trump. What have you been hearing today on the Hill? What are folks expecting the result of this race to be?
Cabot, no one knows. I mean, look, there are people who have their predictions locked in as always, but unlike we keep going back to the last big primary, right, which was oh, hold on. I just got a Kalshi notification from our friends at Kalshi. I'm going to interrupt myself. Thomas Massie's odds of winning on Kalshi are now, right as the polls close, 39%. That's pretty crazy. So a couple of days ago, remember, it was 50-50. Trump got further involved. A couple of scandals broke, not in Massie's favor. Obviously, this is not scientific. The betting markets are not the polls. Even early exit polls are not always necessarily correct. Everyone remember that, right? You got to wait for everything to come in. But 39%, that's pretty staggering. So what are people saying in Washington? This one has people kind of confused. They're not confused, but no, it could break either way. Think about the Louisiana primary on Saturday, right? No one until a couple of weeks ago thought that Bill Cassidy wasn't going to pull it out, right? Julia Letlow was a good challenger, but Bill Cassidy's been a two-term senator, and as we've said, not since 2012 as an incumbent senator from either party, lost the primary election. Then a few days before, the polls started breaking in Letlow's favor. The president came out and made increasingly aggressive statements against Cassidy. Everyone kind of decided by Saturday morning, Bill Cassidy's done. He's coming in third, which is, of course, exactly what happened. There is not that much certainty in Washington today about the Kentucky primary. Now, I think a little bit of this is bet hedging. I think part of this is that the stakes are very big. $33 million is the final, as of today, at least count. Maybe we'll get some more numbers in the coming days. We'll see some money that's been poured in, but it's hugely expensive for a House race. And Thomas Massie is known as a bit of a political Rasputin. You'd never get him down. This is not the first time that Thomas Massie has been on the ropes, on the mats, whatever metaphor you want to use, and he's come back. Now, I personally don't think he's making it back. I will stay my prediction right here on air. I'm happy to come back on and eat my words as always if I'm wrong. I think that the combined heft of the Republican Party, President Trump, and a number of scandals, as I said, that broke against Congressman Massie, I think Ed Galrine pulls it off tonight. But I think that a lot of people don't want to say that or don't feel confident saying that because they really think that you just never can fully count Thomas Massie out.
Tim, sometimes when people say, I'm staking my reputation on this prediction, it's really moving. It's, wow, that's a lot of reputation to stake. When it's coming from you, though, staking your reputation, I'm just, okay. It doesn't really move me that much. No offense. But Tim, we're going to stick around. We're going to bring you back. We cannot yet confirm who's going to win this race, but I can confirm for our audience that the man, the myth, the legend, Mark Halperin is joining us now. He is the host of a number of fantastic shows. Go watch Up Next. It's absolutely fantastic. I had the pleasure of being on his program today. Mark, I told you, hey, I was on your show. I'd love to get you on my show now. I didn't think it would be like 7 hours later. So thank you for being here.
Happy to be here. A couple things. First of all, you stole the joke I was about to tell about Tim. So I feel I need to find some new material. Second of all, mild correction. My show is called Next Up, not Up Next. That's okay. Sometimes the producers get it wrong too. And I couldn't be happier to be here and partake in being guest as opposed to host.
Okay, so in a few minutes, we're going to get these results trickling in. I, like many others, are constantly refreshing the state website, trying to get them. But if Galrine does pull this off tonight, just how big of a message does this send? And what is the message that's being sent?
I mean, I think the message is that the Trump political machine usually, not always, gets its way. I'll be curious to see what happens in the Alabama Senate primary. And I'll be curious to see, of course, what happens now in the Texas race. But Massie is a little, as Tim and Marcel Marceau would say, he's a little sui generis, right? There are not a lot of members of the House Republican Conference about whom the president feels so strongly. And so they went all in on this. And Massie's also, he's a little pine coney. He's a little unusual. And so that was for Tim. He didn't even laugh. So I think that the lesson is one we've learned before. The Trump political operation, when it sets its mind on destroying another Republican, is very effective. But we knew that thing before. And again, Massie's just the circumstances that we're not going to see any place quite like it anywhere else during the time of the president's period in office.
Unfortunately, I did catch the pinecone reference, and you can hear Tim typing right now, and I think he might be Googling what you mean by that. Tim, just stop Googling. You don't need to keep looking it up.
Mark, I got the reference.
Tim wants to know how I got booked.
Mark, I know you're a political historian, so can you just give us some context here for what President Trump is doing with this overt meddling in these primaries? We know that presidents do this behind the scenes, but what sort of precedent is there for this happening this overtly?
Not like this, and not for the reasons it's being done. And make no mistake, the press bias often will downplay the ruthlessness of Democratic presidents as compared to Republicans. You look at what the Biden White House did to Democrats who had the temerity to suggest that Joe Biden had lost a step or two. They were very rough on those folks, not just in terms of calling them and privately chewing them out, but threatening their political careers. So in that sense, it's not unusual. What's unusual here is the public nature of it and the degree to which they're going after folks. I mean, Cornyn, has Cornyn been the most MAGA, the most loyal? Absolutely not. And I do remember that one of the things that got into the president's craw was when he was doubtful that Trump would be the nominee in 2024. A view held by many Republican senators at the time. Cornyn chose to say the quiet part out loud, and that hurt him. But I don't know how his voting record differs from the Tennessee senators or others who are so ostentatiously loyal to the president. But I think also it's a little strange, and I'm amazed by insiders. This hasn't been commented more. Two of the president's top 4 political advisors worked for the Cornyn campaign. They're trying to get Cornyn elected, and the president went against them, including Chris LaCivita. So this is unusual to do it so overtly and to go after people not because of policy in most cases, although the Massie one is a lot of bad policy, and I think that's an under discussed thing. Just personally, his view is, I'm not going to support incumbents. Other presidents bow to the wishes of the congressional wing of their party, where incumbent retention and incumbent support is everything to them because they don't like the code to be broken.
Mark, Tim earlier was mentioning the Kalshi odds in the Kentucky primary favoring Galrein right now. If you looked at the Kalshi odds for the Texas primary, actually I should say about an hour before President Trump endorsed Ken Paxton, we saw a jump in the market. So maybe there were some rumblings going on in D.C. about which way this was going. But since that's happened, James Tallarico has jumped up in the odds, the market seeming to like his odds better against Paxton than Cornyn. Do you agree with that assessment?
No.
Why is that?
Look, if the national environment is as horrific by November as it is now, I think Tallarico has about a 30% chance of winning. But if the national environment for Republicans improves somewhat, I don't think that this is the guy, even against Paxton. I don't think that this is the guy who's going to break a 50-year or so drought of Democrats winning statewide in Texas. I just don't think he's that guy. And I think the opposition research is just starting. If you watch Paxton's interview on Fox today, he was like Thune. He was very calm. He was not fiery. And I think you're going to see him put his head down and talk about his conservative positions and talk about the very liberal positions of the Democratic nominee. So it's going to take a blue wave of enormous proportions to have Tallarico have a chance in this race. And I just don't see him being the first Democrat in several generations to win a statewide race in Texas.
We just had Senator Jon Husted on from Ohio. I asked him about his reaction to this endorsement, and he was not exactly animated. It was pretty clear that he was not thrilled by Trump not going with Cornyn. Tim, I'm interested. You're on Capitol Hill all day. What has been the reaction from senators? Have there been any GOP lawmakers on the Hill that you've seen happy about this endorsement?
No, it's been, you said like tight-lipped or something. It's been a lot of everyone, the kind of congressional press corps that, ambushes lawmakers in the hallways coming up after they were leaving votes or committee meetings or their office, and everyone was just kind of doing the 10,000 yard stare, no comment, not weighing in. I think Susan Collins said that Ken Paxton was a morally compromised individual and outright condemned the president's endorsement. But I want to follow on something that Mark said. And I hate to put myself in a position where I'm agreeing with Mark, who's always right, so he doesn't need my help. But I think there's the Tallarico thing is so oversold, and I think there are two elements to this. One is that there's always some young Texas Democrat who launches their campaign from the back of a pickup truck and has Annie Leibovitz photo spreads in Vanity Fair and gets the Obama endorsement and is finally going to be the one who turns Texas blue or who flips the Texas Senate seat blue. Didn't happen with Beto O'Rourke. It didn't happen with, Wendy Davis when she ran for the House. It's not going to happen with James Tallarico. And the other thing is that, look, setting aside, people have been forgetting, I think, that what follows a primary is a general election, right? So they're looking at all of the oppo that the Cornyn camp was dumping on Paxton. They're looking at Paxton's more firebrand ways as Attorney General of Texas. They're saying this guy isn't going to win. In the general, we need to run the safe candidate. Now, setting aside the fact that that conventional wisdom might not be correct anymore, right? It might actually be exactly the kind of person who could defeat, right? The antidote, the way to defeat a charismatic centrist Democrat is with a firebrand kind of controversial Republican. But even setting that aside, the fact is Ken Paxton is a talented politician. He's a good candidate. Yes, he's very different from John Cornyn. That's why he primaried him. But I do think that we sort of lost the thread, or that Washington, Republican insiders did kind of lose the thread on this point, where it's like, yeah, of course he's by nature different, and just because he's been a little bit. He was running as a renegade in the primary. That's what he has to do. He wants to unseat a multi-term incumbent. He wants to unseat someone who's held leadership positions in the upper chambers and a Texas and Washington institution. As you said, he'll run a different campaign in the general. We're already seeing it. His interviews are already going to be a little bit calmer. He's going to start appealing to a broader base, because this is just how it works. The transition from a primary, a very brutal and bloody primary, to a general election where it's very easy to appeal to the Republican base. Vote for me. Don't let this guy be the first Democrat that Texas elects to the Senate in however many years. So I think that we're kind of overthinking this a little bit. I think that Paxton probably has.
It would be very funny if after all of this. It would be very funny if after all of this, Cornyn wins the primary and just completely turns everything
I
on
just
its head.
said if he wins the primary.
Yeah. Tim, hearing you talk about Tallarico and the excitement from national Democrats maybe being overstated because they like this shiny new object in a deep red state. Mark, I'm interested in your take. Do you think that's what's happening right now with Republicans in LA, seeing Spencer Pratt? He can go viral. He's got great debate moments. But do you think it's the same situation where folks are getting overly excited and forgetting, in the same way Tallarico's running in Texas, Pratt is still running in Los Angeles?
I mean, if they're like me and predict he's going to win, they've gotten overly excited. But I think the more important lesson, and this is actually the subject of my monologue on Next Up that's online now, is the lesson is not make great ads, although make great ads is good. The lesson is not learn how to use AI to make great ads, although that's an important lesson. The lesson to me is that Republicans have had decades to put something in the marketplace of ideas in our major metropolitan areas to start winning some of these mayor's races and governing cities in a different way. We're letting down another generation of children by having failing schools and unsafe streets and homelessness and economic stagnation, because Republicans' failure to figure out how to offer alternative ideas is just as pronounced as the Democratic failures to govern successfully. And I think what Pratt has done, even though he's not been very specific on policy, what he has done is given even some of my liberal friends in Hollywood and LA a chance to say, no, we're going to have to govern the city differently. It can't be governed by super progressive Democrats who have failed us for decades. We saw Dick Reardon as a moderate, and it's kind of a crypto Republican. We saw Bloomberg and Giuliani in Gotham City do it. Very few other examples. And so I think what the lesson from Pratt that conservatives should be excited about is if you find a way to communicate that you'll govern differently, like Donald Trump did in 2016. May not be specific, may not love everything about Spencer Pratt, may not think he's the right candidate in every respect. But if you're sick of the status quo, and this is where the ads have been brilliant, you want change. And the new ad that he's got, not ad, but web video of AI-generated women at a Pilates class all secretly saying they're voting for Spencer Pratt and then realizing they all are. That's the thing. Permission structure, right? Fancy term to say, make people who've never voted Republican in their life feel comfortable voting for a Republican. And I think that's where the party's failed. They have to make it possible for people to imagine. The only reason Mike Bloomberg was able to win was because of 9/11 and Republican Democrats and independents in sufficient numbers saying, you know what, we can't turn the city to a liberal Democrat under these conditions. That's what Pratt's done. He's made it imaginable that a conservative, a Republican could govern the city.
You mentioned that Spencer Pratt Pilates ad appealing to a lot of maybe moderate moms. It also appealed to Tim Rice because you may not know this. He is an avid Pilates adherent, and you should see him. He gets in the spandex and he does the reformer thing with the legs over the head. Tim, you're laughing.
I'm not going to laugh at this because I do Pilates. So Seems sensible to me.
Wow, Cabot, way to put your foot. You put your foot in your mouth like you were in the Reformer there.
I've learned the correct name of Mark's show, which I am so sorry for messing up. And I've also learned that Mark is far more flexible than I imagined. Mark, before I let you go, though, I know you got to go. One more question.
Yeah.
Let's zoom out here. Give us a race in November that not enough people are talking about that you think could surprise some folks.
New Hampshire Senate. John Sununu will return to the Senate against an untested candidate, unless the environment is such it's impossible. But otherwise, I think Democrats will lose Michigan, Maine, and New Hampshire, making it more likely that they pick up a Senate seat than that Democrats take the majority.
All right, we will leave it there. Mark Halperin, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. Everyone go check out.
I enjoyed it.
Everyone go check out Next Up with Mark Halperin, and make sure to tune in to today's episode to see yours truly. Mark, really appreciate it.
It's a good one. Thank you, guys. Great to see you both.
All right, we've also got Tim Rice still with us. Tim, before you go, as these results start to come in tonight, what are you going to be watching over the next hour that you think could tell us how this thing in Kentucky is going to turn out?
I mean, a few things. One is, it's the only on primary nights can you engage in the cliche of it all comes down to turnout. I am gonna be looking at turnout. I've I think most of us in Washington who are political watchers, I've tried to familiarize myself with the specific political geography of the Kentucky Fourth over the past few days. I haven't really learned anything. That's the thing with primary elections, right? It's hard because this is part of what adds to the mystery or the kind of uncertainty, right? When it's a state, you could say, all right, Louisville just voted and they lean Dem, but this other part, when it's just one district, it's the district, right? It's a solidly red district, so we don't really know. I guess, exit polls and interviews that people on the ground are giving as they leave, right? Again, I really can't stress enough that those things are wrong or misdirecting as often as they are correct or indicative of what's going to happen. I will nevertheless be watching them. I'm also going to be watching Thomas Massie's social media presence and President Trump's social media presence, because I do not, unless, of course, one of these candidates pulls off an absolute landslide and we find out in the next 9 minutes that Gowrine or Massie ran away with 80% of the vote. I do not think this is going to be an early concession. I think that Massie is going to fight as long as possible. I think the president is going to have Gowrine fight as long as possible. And I expect to see vocal commentary from both the Massie camp and the White House specifically. And notice I'm being intentional here. I'm not saying Gowrine, and I don't mean that to say that Ed Gowrine is a puppet. I just think, Thomas Massie is a firebrand, Donald Trump is a firebrand, Ed Gowrine is, again, in this, he seems like the outlier in this scenario, but he really is just sort of acting like a normal political candidate on primary night. He's doing exactly what you would expect, which is to say laying low until it's time to either concede or accept. So I am going to be watching, I will be glued to those two X feeds in particular for the next little bit.
Now, this is why you come to the Daily Wire and Tim Rice, because you get unparalleled predictions that Donald Trump is going to be tweeting some fiery things. You can't get that sort of commentary anywhere else.
And Before you let me go, I do want to just direct everybody to a place where smarter people than me are giving commentary. DailyWire.com right now. We are running our primary night live blog. It's been going for the past couple of hours. It's about to pick up speed. All of our reporters are engaged, including editor-in-chief Brent Scher, who was just in Kentucky last night. He's in Columbus, Ohio now, but he's just been doing his grand tour. So we've got the whole team is watching the results, not just in Kentucky, but in Georgia and all the other races tonight. We're going to be blogging until the last results come in, even if that extends until tomorrow morning. So it's right there on the website. I can't encourage everyone enough that once Wired In Live wraps, of course, head on over to the live blog. That'll carry you through for the rest of the night. And what a perfect way to end your segment, Tim, because we have our first votes coming in. We have 45 votes from Spencer County. Ed Gowrine has won 30 of them. Thomas Massie, 15. So I'm going to go ahead and call the race right now. Ed Gowrine has won with those 45 votes. No, I will not do that. But everyone stick around. Go check out the live blog. Daily Wire DC Bureau Chief Tim Rice, and that was Mark Halperin joining him earlier. Tim, thanks so much, man. Thanks, Kevin.
Well, the Kentucky primary is gobbling up the lion's share of attention tonight. However, there are also crucial primary races taking place today in the great state of Georgia. On the Senate side, Congressman Mike Collins appears to be leading the GOP field with former Tennessee football coach Derek Dooley and Representative Buddy Carter fighting for second place. If no candidate hits 50% tonight, the top two will head to a runoff on June 16th. As for the gubernatorial race, the crowded four-man field could also produce a runoff where businessman Rick Jackson and Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones appear to have a polling advantage right now. Here to break it all down is Ralph Reed, chairman of the Faith and Freedom Coalition, and also Georgia native, I might add. Ralph, great to have you on.
Good to be with you, Cabot.
So let's start with the Senate race where Republicans will look to knock off incumbent Jon Ossoff. This has been a brutal primary so far. What do you expect to see tonight when polls close about an hour from now?
Well, I think this has been a very interesting race in that this is a statewide race, the Georgia Senate race, probably the best single pickup opportunity to defeat a Senate incumbent in the country. This is a state that Donald Trump carried twice and only narrowly lost in 2020 under what were, shall we say, controversial circumstances. About 11,000 votes out of over 5 million. So this is a purple state, but it's a Republican state, and Trump is very strong here, but he did not make an endorsement in this primary, Cabot. And as you indicated, Mike Collins has been leading in most of the polls, but not in any kind of a breakout way. And it's going to be a big fight if you believe any of the pre-primary polling between Buddy Carter and Derek Dooley to make that runoff. Derek does have a very, very valuable endorsement, and that is the endorsement of popular incumbent Governor Brian Kemp. And Brian Kemp never engages in half measures, and he's left it all on the field to try and get Derek into this runoff. If they make it, it's going to be a knockdown, drag-out runoff until June 16th.
If this Senate primary does go to a runoff, are you concerned by what that means for Democrats and Senator Ossoff? How much of an advantage does that give the left?
Well, I've never been terribly worried about raucous and even really hard-fought primaries. They turn voters out. They help build the predicate for a strong ground game in the fall. They tend to toughen up whoever becomes the ultimate nominee and make them a far better general election candidate, with the obvious caveat, Cabot, that when this thing is over, both in the governor's race and the Senate race, the Republicans need to be able to unify. But as long as you can unify when it's over, raucous, hard-fought, even bitter primaries, all they do is turn out Republican voters, and that's never a bad thing. The rough math is anybody who votes for you in a primary or runoff is almost certain to vote for you in November. So it's not a bad thing.
We saw President Trump really take his time in endorsing down in Texas, waiting until the final week,
did we ever?
Picking AG Paxton. You know President Trump quite well. Do you have any inclination of if he's going to take the same course in the Georgia elections if it goes to a runoff?
I really don't. I think that the White House took a real hard look at this race early on and strongly considered making an endorsement. There was an effort made, you probably know, Cabot, to try and make sure that Brian Kemp and Donald Trump were not at odds as they were in 2020. We did a good job. I say we, I mean collectively. The entire conservative and Republican team in the Peach State got on the same team and were rowing in the same direction in 2024, and it made a big difference. Brian Kemp was helping the president. Everybody was united. I'm not saying that they were all pen pals, and golfing buddies. They were not, but we all got on the same team, and it made a big difference. But that didn't come together. Trump took a pass so far. I can't predict what he would do in a runoff.
Now, one race where I don't exactly expect folks to start golfing together and rowing in the same boat is Kentucky's 4th District. Obviously, we're watching the results there. We're going to put those up on the screen. They're starting to come in. Only 4% in right now. Ed Galrein with a 55-45 lead. Again, I just caution folks, we are very, very early in the evening, so there are going to be more populous districts and counties that start to come in. But I'm interested for your take on President Trump's efforts to unseat Thomas Massie. Where do you fall on that primary battle?
Well, I know a little bit about that district, probably longer ago than I want to acknowledge. In a previous life as a political consultant, I helped run a race in that district in 1998. Know the district well, and it's strongly Republican. And look, Donald Trump is the head of this party, and the support that he has among rank and file Republicans and especially primary voters is as strong or stronger than I've ever seen in my career, Cabin. And that's saying a lot because I go back to the Reagan era. And, I'm not in the prediction business, but I do not understand after watching, we don't need to go through them all, but Bill Cassidy just within the last week, another Georgia member of Congress, Marjorie Taylor Greene, within the last, few months. And
Indiana as well.
The Indiana state legislators and on we could go. I mean, Liz Cheney, the list of folks that have crossed Donald Trump, either in perception or in reality, and saw the end of their political careers is long at this point. And it reminds me, honestly, Cabot, a lot of the Reagan era. Most people don't understand that when Reagan won the nomination, even though he was the nominee, it wasn't really his party yet. And even when he came in 1981, and I was on Capitol Hill at the time, most of the senators and congressmen had been elected before Reagan, and their loyalties were not really to him. And it wasn't until 84 and 85 that the party was fully his. And the same kind of thing has happened here. And so I'm not a betting man, and I'm not in the prediction business, but I think it's going to be uphill tonight for Thomas Massie.
Yeah, and those results still starting to trickle in. We're almost up to 5% of the vote in. So our audience watching, we will continue to track those numbers as they come in. But Ralph, while I have you, I want to get to the Rededicate 250 event, which took place this weekend on the National Mall. It was beautiful. We saw thousands of Christians gathering to pray and worship. There were also virtual appearances from President Trump and other White House officials. That's what got the headlines because many folks on the left criticized the administration for taking part. They were saying it was an example of this terrifying Christian nationalism. What is your response to those claims?
My response to those claims is, go back and refamiliarize yourself with the founders of this country and the founding documents of this country. Because our founders believed that the very foundation of our freedoms, the very foundation of the American experiment, was the then very radical and frankly, in many ways, Cabot, still a very radical idea, arguably the most radical idea, the most transformational idea in all of human history apart from the gospel, which is that we are endowed by God Almighty with inalienable rights, that God gives us these rights. They're inherent to our very humanity, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. More of those rights, of course, would ultimately be spelled out in the Bill of Rights and in the Constitution proper. And the founders argued and declared in the Declaration that the sole purpose of creating a government was to protect those rights. And if a government ever failed to protect those rights, then it was not only the right, but it was the duty and the moral obligation of a free people to overthrow that government by force if necessary and replace it with a government that did protect those rights. So there's no way to understand America and understand our 250th anniversary of our founding apart from the notion that our rights come from God and that the purpose of government is to protect our God-given rights. So I thought Rededicate 250 was an outstanding program. I commend the president and his administration and the White House for giving the faith community and all Americans this opportunity to reaffirm that apart from faith in God, that our freedoms are not secure.
Ralph, I have one final question for you. You've worked very closely with the Trump administration and also the White House Faith Office. Tell us what the administration has done in this second term to support people of faith and Christian Americans specifically.
Well, it's a very long list. I would just highlight a few. One is the defunding of Planned Parenthood, which was in the Working Families Tax Bill, also known as the Big Beautiful Bill. That's the first time that funding of Planned Parenthood has been banned throughout government. Since we began working on that project over 30 years ago. It's a huge victory. The expansion of the child tax credit, another victory also in the Working Families Tax Cut. The president's creation of the Religious Liberty Commission, which is going to be wrapping up its work now, which held hearings throughout the country to look at encroachments on religious freedom. And then some of this is from the first term, but it's still paying dividends today, which is the 3 Supreme Court justices that he appointed and the nearly 300 other federal judges, which is giving us victory after victory after victory, including in this second term, the coach, actually during the Biden term, but going into the second Trump term, the overturning of the Lemon Test in the Coach Kennedy case, where he got fired from a high school because he voluntarily prayed after football games. And the Supreme Court not only overturned that, but they made it clear that the precedent of the so-called Lemon Test that determined whether or not a statute or policy violated the Establishment Clause is now in the ash heap of history where it belongs. And there are many other victories, including, I would argue pretty strongly, Cabot, the action, the military action, both Midnight Hammer and Epic Fury, to make sure that the leading state sponsor of terror in the world no longer poses an existential threat to Israel and no longer can undermine our national security interests in the region and around the world. I think that is a step that is long overdue, maybe not 47 years overdue. And evangelical Christians in the faith community strongly support this president in making sure that Iran can no longer get a nuclear weapon.
Well, Ralph, we appreciate your insight tonight. We know you guys have your Road to Majority conference coming up June 25th, 27th. We do. The Daily Wire has been there for that conference in the past, heard from President Trump and other faith leaders. So we look forward to covering that event as well. But Ralph, really appreciate you making time for us tonight.
You bet. Good to be with you, Cabot.
All right, guys, we've got the results coming in now from Kentucky's 4th congressional district. Right now, we have about 4% of the vote in. Ed Gowrine holding about a 10% lead over Thomas Massie. Right now, again, only about 4,500 votes coming in. So we are still waiting for quite a few more votes to come in, especially from some of the more populous areas up around the northern part of the district. So stay tuned. These votes do come in batches. So we're at 4% now, but any moment we could refresh and it could be 10%. So hopefully this will be not too long of an evening. But if it is a long night, our very own Tim Rice will be here to spend time with us. Tim, I'm going to bring you back on. I'm interested, can you just give us some context on this race? I think there are some folks that are tuning in right now who are saying, okay, why is this one congressional primary getting so much attention? Can you just give us some context for where this bad blood between Thomas Massie, who for years has been one of the most popular members of Congress, as he noted back in 2022, President Trump endorsed him strongly, calling him a conservative warrior. And Massie gained a lot of fame during COVID lockdowns as being undoubtedly one of the most solid Republican members of Congress on this topic. So where did the relationship start to fray, and why is this race so important?
Yeah, great questions. And I think you're absolutely right. It's important to sort of reset. Let's take it back. Let's kind of work in reverse, right? Because right now, people are focusing a lot on two things that happened very recently, which was the war in Iran and Congressman Massie's opposition to the war in Iran, as well as his critique of the way the Trump administration has handled the Epstein files, specifically sort of alleging that perhaps it's because Donald Trump or members of his administration are in the Epstein files and sort of alleging a cover-up, right? So Massie is part of one of these, sort of renegade Republican coalition that includes also, former Congressman Marjorie Taylor Greene, Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna, both of whom have campaigned for Massie, and Marjorie Taylor Greene is, of course, one of Massie's earliest and staunchest allies. But Mark Halperin was on the show before, and he was talking about how this primary, it seems like it's not really about policy, but it actually is more about policy than you would think. And that's a great point, because really the ultimate roots of this bad blood, or sort of the beginning of the bad blood, is that Thomas Massie opposed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Now, for some reason, this really stuck in the president's craw, right? It was basically Thomas Massie and Rand Paul in the Senate. So just the sort of two budget hawk libertarians, which is what Thomas Massie was known for, right? I mean, you're right that he was known for, being anti-COVID lockdown and vaccine mandate, but really he was a budget hawk. And so he was opposed to the Big Beautiful Bill Act on the grounds that it was too much government spending. Now, whether it was because, the majorities were such that the president was less concerned about getting the bill passed in the Senate than he was in the House, maybe it's just because, Rand Paul is kind of known as being Rand Paul, and the president never expected him to vote for the bill, but maybe he thought, his old pal, Thomas Massie, who voted with him 99% of the time, was going to vote with him. So I think, right, that's the sort of thing that really affects this president, right? And I say that, I actually want to immediately clarify that, because yes, that's sort of public, what the president would probably describe as disloyalty, right? As betrayal, sticks a lot with this president. But this is actually one where, that's maybe say with the war or the Epstein files, but the Big Beautiful Bill Act is this president's signature domestic legislative accomplishment, not just in his second term, but in his first term. It's transformational legislation and has sweeping impacts on everything from government spending to the tax code and beyond. So it's understandable that any president would see someone who had been one of their staunchest allies so vociferously and publicly opposing their major legislative package. That's gonna set them on edge, right? That's gonna set any politician on edge. Certainly, this president.
Let's go ahead also and bring in right now Daily Wire editor-in-chief Brent Scher. Brent, you were in Kentucky yesterday covering this race. Tell us a little bit about what the vibe was there on the ground.
Yeah, hey, sorry you keep catching me on the road. I've been busy. Yeah, in Kentucky, we went to a Thomas Massie event at the end of the night, and I was saying they were very, very confident. They were very excited, I think, about all of the energy that was around Thomas Massie. I think where the kind of question is whether that energy is energy that's actually going to make it to the polling places, or just an energy that's going to get a lot of retweets on X. And, X retweets don't do you much unless those people live in Kentucky's 4th district, which is just a massive, sprawling, really, really rural district. So when they're saying that they had a massive turnout at their event last night, I mean, it's at max a couple of hundred people. So, I mean, it's really hard to see what that's actually going to do at the actual polling places today. I'd say one of the most stunning and telling things again. Yesterday, I told you that one of the most stunning things was that Massie was still running ads about being an ally of Trump. Today, it's that in the last hour of the race, he sent a text message to all of his supporters telling them that Donald Trump actually endorsed him. It was a lie, and Donald Trump went to his X account to weigh in and say that it was a lie. But again, it's just that feeling that he needs to convince people that he's not actually this enemy of Trump, that he is. Because right now he is. The people who are supporting him are saying that, a vote for Ed Galrein, Trump's candidate, is a vote for Jeffrey Epstein. There's no coming back from this. You are an enemy of Donald Trump. And I mean, that's what the race is. It's Donald Trump versus Thomas Massie.
Got it.
And it's going to be really close.
Go ahead, Tim.
Gavin, I actually have that Trump tweet pulled up. I was waiting for someone to bring it up. So if you know, I just want to read it. I'm sure you read it earlier, but just so Trump posted on Truth Social, he said, horrible Congressman Thomas Massie put out an old endorsement from many years ago of him by me long before I found out that he was the worst congressman in the history of our country. I endorsed Ed Galrine, a true American patriot, which Massie knows full well. So the statement that he put out is fraudulent, just like he is fraudulent. And then in all caps, withdraw your fake statement, Massie, right now, President Donald J. Trump. So
and we had some folks
incredible back and forth right down to the wire here.
Go ahead, Brent.
I was just going to say, like, you should go on the Daily Wire right now. We have an article about that and see how deceptive what Massie sent out is. He cut out the date on the endorsement that Donald Trump gave him in 2022. So this wasn't even last cycle. It was 2 cycles ago, but it kind of matched because it was like he endorses the congressman he once criticized, which is kind of fitting into here. But it's just full-blown deception in the last 2 hours of a race. Stinks of desperation to me, but, you know, campaigns pull out all the stops.
We have some folks in the chat who have pointed out that, you know, President Trump was very angry about this when he resorted to going back to X to post about it. Whenever he posts something on X, it means he wants as many people as possible to see it, because usually he's only talking on Truth Social. But no, he's going straight to X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it these days.
It was his first X post in, I believe, 2.5 months.
So it tells you how strongly he feels about it. There's an interesting, and for everyone who's watching now, if you're watching on YouTube, head over to dailywire.com and join our chat there so you can get your questions in. If you're not a member, become a member, dailywire.com/subscribe, so we can get some of your questions here on the show. First of all, Brent, one of the questions people want to know in the chat, are you in a Cybertruck right now?
I am in a Cybertruck.
Oh, that's
my
awesome.
first Cybertruck experience. It's really cool. Gets a lot of looks in northern Kentucky. We were in Columbus, Ohio today, all over the place with the Cybertruck. People were really excited about the Cybertruck. And Elon Musk made a nice little vehicle here.
Yeah, and there are going to be folks now saying that's a paid advertisement. It's not a paid advertisement, but if Elon Musk wants to send the Daily Wire a communal Cybertruck, we will gladly take that ad. There's an interesting question here in the chat right now. Someone's asking, Tim and Brent, if Thomas Massie does win, do you think that Democrats will make a big deal out of it, and will they try and remind everyone Donald Trump does not actually have power in the GOP? Tim, what do we think? Is that going to be the message?
Absolutely. It'll be 2 prongs, I would guess. The first is the serious message, which is what you just noted. They're going to say the president does not have power. They're going to run that through the midterms. They're going to say that, in fact, maybe his endorsement is a kiss of death to try to drive dissension in other primaries and other races. They're going to bring up things where they agree with Massie, something we've already sort of seen mainstream media coverage of Massie in the past couple of days. The legacy outlets have sort of ignored the kind of late-breaking scandals about his romantic history and, you know, these alleged hush money payments. And instead, they're reporting on, you know, he's a reasonable Republican voice on the war. He's anti-war. He's anti-Epstein files, whatever that means. So that's going to be one of them. And the second is that I think this is a great opportunity for a resurgence of 2017 resistance Democrats, sort of like I can already just imagine, you know, Hillary Clinton tweeting, you know, if Thomas Massie wins, like, sorry, Donald, this just goes to show that you can't buy your way out of this one, or like something dumb like that. So if Massie wins, the left will and the Democratic Party will be as insufferable as ever. It's all they know how to do.
Yeah, I think they'll be insufferable no matter what happens. It's just the degree to their insufferability, what it will be. I want to get to the Texas race. Again, for those just now joining us, results have started to trickle in from Kentucky's 4th Congressional District. Right now, almost 5% in. Ed Galrine leading Thomas Massie by about 10%. But we are still very early, waiting for the next batch to come in. Let's get to the Kalshi odds now. Let's throw those up on the screen. We've talked multiple times. Our partners over at Kalshi, they do a lot of times even more accurate of a job of predicting which race or which way a race will go. Right now, the Kalshi odds, wow, look at that. Ed Galrine up to 87% to take home the win. That is Massie down at 13%. Those numbers were significantly closer the last week. So the market's seeming to believe that Gallrein is going to pull this off. Again, I would say we're very early. But if folks disagree, head on over to Kalshi, put your money where your mouth is, and say, hey, no, I think this is going to be Thomas Massie. Brent, I know you're someone who always loves some long odds, which you get a lot of as a New York Jets fan. Do you like those odds of Massie at 13% right now?
No, I don't. I liked the odds on Ed Gallrein a few weeks ago when he was about 30%. And full disclosure, I'm in that market. It seemed like an obvious thing. It was a toss-up election, and he was the underdog. And, you know, being the underdog with the full and total endorsement of Donald Trump in a district that Donald Trump won by 35% doesn't seem to make much sense. I think what we're seeing, and the reason that this is moving so far into Gallrein's direction, is a lot of people who are in that district and actually doing things and doing internal polls to try and figure out how much, what the result's going to be. I think they were seeing a very, very different race than Thomas Massie's supporters were hoping they'd see, and that there's a lot of support for Donald Trump and Ed Gallrein. And, you know, those people who are doing polling, I mean, we talk about how much money was dropped on this race. The people dropping a lot of money on this race are also dropping money on polls to see whether it's working and what messaging is working. So it's possible that those are the people investing in the market and moving it towards 80, 90%. That's when you're on the ground in a state, people on the campaigns generally know pretty early in the day whether what they were doing worked or not.
Guys, also for our audience at home, if you see me looking down at my screen, don't worry, I'm not just texting. I am monitoring all of the latest results coming in. This is a watch party. We're all watching it together. Don't act like you folks at home aren't doing the same thing.
That's right.
We're still waiting for the next batch of votes to come in. But I want to get to the Texas primary, where President Trump, again, earlier today, endorsed Ken Paxton, the LG of, or the AG, I should say, of Texas, against John Cornyn, the incumbent Republican senator. Just this hour, we have breaking. Senator John Cornyn actually just tweeted, quote, "I'm canceling my campaign events for tomorrow and heading back to D.C. tonight. As a member of Budget GOP and on behalf of the nearly 32 million Texans I'm honored to represent, I will vote tomorrow a.m. to end the absurd and irresponsible Democrat funding of ICE and CBP and fund their important work first in committee and then on the Senate floor." So, guys, usually when a candidate says that they are going to cancel their campaign events, I've worked on a campaign. That was the first sign that I needed to start looking for work because it was going to end. Senator Cornyn not dropping out yet, but Tim, does this seem to be the writing on the wall of him saying, hey, President Trump made his presence felt in the race, I'm going to drop out?
Yeah, yes, 85% yes, and the 15% that I'm saving, I'll give it to Senator Cornyn, which is that I think there's a way to see this as the Cornyn camp playing to the senators the one advantage that he still has over Ken Paxton, which is that he's already a United States senator, right? So the campaign is over in as much as I realistically don't think that any more door knocking or sign posting is going to offset President Trump's complete and total endorsement, right? So in that sense, the small c campaigning, I think, is over. The campaign with a capital C, of course, doesn't end until one of them drops out or we get to the runoff election. And so if I were John Cornyn, this is exactly what I would do. Remind everybody that I've been doing this for 15 years in the Senate or however long he's been in government, right? I'm going to go fight the Democrats, pass the president's agenda, chair my committee, represent the people of Texas, just like I have been doing. It's absolutely a Hail Mary. I don't think it's enough to give him a leg back up over Paxton with the Trump endorsement, but it's not a bad move.
Let's come back to Kentucky, where we still have votes trickling in right now. Brent, I talked to Tim about this earlier on the program, and some of the messaging that we saw from Thomas Massie today. He had a Fox News interview where he framed his race essentially as being him against Israel. He specifically invoked Miriam Adelson, the mega donor who is Jewish and has also supported pro-Israel causes. He talked about the Israel lobby, I believe was the phrase that he used, trying to frame his race as, hey, it's me against those people that support Israel. That is what he was saying on Fox. Folks can go look up the clip for themselves. What do you make of that framing? Is that just a desperate move at the very end of him trying to say, hey, this is it's me versus Israel? Or do you think he actually believes that? And what do you make of that claim?
Yes, but first I need to talk about Texas. Cornyn is so cooked. And I think what actually happened here is that Donald Trump knew how cooked Cornyn was. And that's why he decided to finally throw his weight behind Ken Paxton. So, yeah, I think I don't even know if he makes it to the election, but I love Jon Cornyn. I think it's the right thing to do, to go back and vote and do your job rather than run a, end of the road campaign. But back to Kentucky and your question, which is a great one. It's kind of what I was referring to earlier, where it sounds almost like Thomas Massie is working on his post-Congress podcast career and messaging on that more than he is messaging to the people of Kentucky's 4th District. Obviously, this is not Israel. These are American Jews dropping money. It's actually illegal for anybody who's not an American to spend money on campaigns. So, I mean, it's just an absurd statement. I've seen some of his supporters saying that the amount of money spent against Thomas Massie means that the election is rigged against him, which again is absurd. This is what campaign politics is. Every biggest election becomes the most expensive election there is. Donald Trump and Joe Biden both spent hundreds of millions of dollars on their campaigns. I believe there have been billion-dollar campaigns, and nobody would say it's rigged because people spent so much money in support of Donald Trump. I think it's a bit of coping, and Thomas Massie kind of speaking to where this new support is coming from for him. And honestly, the question is whether he's preparing for that post-Congress career, or maybe he's actually convinced that this is what people in Kentucky's 4th District care about. I think he'd be wrong. These people voted 34% in favor of Donald Trump, who has never, ever in his life said anything anti-Israel. He is the most pro-Israel president in the history of the country. So the idea that the people in his district hate Israel and want to hear all this, it's just absurd. And I mean, I think it's why Massie's basically out of the Republican Party now and aligns and got a lot of support from Democrats for this run.
We just had another batch of votes come in. Right now we're up to 6% of votes in. Ed Galrein's lead growing to 12%. Again, we don't want to start writing obituaries yet. This is still very early. I would caution folks to remember that. But Ed Galrein, the primary challenger, up now 12 points with 6% of the votes in. We're going to keep you guys updated as every new batch starts to come in. These things can start to pull up, and these things, the votes, I should say, can start to rack up pretty quickly. So stay tuned for the next drop. We had a question in the chat, Tim, I want to give to you. Brent touched on it a little bit. But someone was asking, what can we expect from Thomas Massie if he does, in fact, lose tonight? Will this be the end of Massie, or is he here to stay in some capacity? What do you expect?
Yeah, he's definitely here to stay. I happen to agree with Brent. I think that, if he loses, it becomes a podcast gig. Well, first, a podcast tour, right? He'll do, we can already kind of predict it. He'll do the dissident right shows. Maybe he'll do Rogan. Maybe he'll get really, really testy and do Fuentes. Then he'll do something shocking, like he'll go on Pod Save America. He'll start appearing on MS Now. He'll go on The Bulwark, right? He'll do the Marjorie Taylor Greene. He'll start revealing the dark secrets of the Republican Party and, why Republicans are doomed as long as they follow Donald Trump. And then eventually he'll start his own podcast. Now, there was a time not that long ago when something like that would mean this person is giving up on electoral politics. They're looking to cash out. They're waiting for their Harvard Institute of Politics fellowship and a consulting credit on the next network political drama that comes around. Not so much anymore, right? Sitting lawmakers have podcasts. Senator Ted Cruz has a podcast. It's a fantastic podcast, right? This is like a normal thing to do. It's a normal thing when in the past, lawmakers would go open a law practice or, return to their, medical practice or career in finance or sit on the board of a hedge fund or, go teach political science at a local college. This is a reasonable thing, right? Being a kind of flamethrower podcaster is a reasonable thing for a lawmaker in temporary Republican exile to do as they plot their comeback for another House race, a Senate race, a 2028 presidential bid, primary challenge to Vice President J.D. Vance. I think it's all on the table for Thomas Massie. And I think, it's not, Brent mentioned, sort of that he seems like he's podcasting. Look at the man's glow up. I've seen a lot of tweets recently about his glow up. He's dressing better. He's got a good haircut. He's posting all these videos from his campaign fundraisers at his house, talking about how he built the house himself and he's making pizza for his donors. I mean, this is a man who has started really curating his media presence at the tail end of a campaign. And to what Brent said, that's very much signifies that he's already looking 1, 2, 3 steps ahead of
well,
this race.
maybe that glow up is an indicator of what he plans to do after this. Could he maybe team up with Clavicular and start looks maxing? Could he start saying, here's how I lost my race, but I mogged my way through Congress with my glow up? I do agree with you on that front. I want to get now to, again, we got the results coming in, 6% of votes in now. Ed Galrein up now, I believe 13.2%. I'm doing a little mental math in my head. Brent, you have been on the road. You were in Kentucky. You're now driving up to Ohio. I have an idea of why you're going to Ohio, given what we've been reporting at the Daily Wire. But tell our audience what you're doing there.
So I've been in Ohio. I'm now heading back, and we're going to go through Kentucky again. Today was a really cool day for the Daily Wire and for Luke Rosiak. We started it out this morning with Vivek Ramaswamy, who did this great press briefing for the local press, and there were a lot of local lawmakers up there. And it was really about Luke Rosiak's reporting on the Medicaid system in Ohio and potential fraud there. And it was really cool just to watch Luke talk with Vivek and other lawmakers and the state auditor about what he found and just see the impact of it immediately. They were so interested in hearing about the work we did and hearing more. And then the next stop was where we were just a couple of hours ago, was Luke Rosiak testified in front of the Ohio Medicaid committee in their legislature. And it was a really good conversation. And I mean, props to Ohio, because they are, I don't know how to say this, they're very aware that Luke found something, because it's so clear that there's a problem there and just this massive spending black hole that nobody had really looked at before Luke did. And they were asking him a lot of hard questions, but not in an attempt to, corner him, but to find out more about it and to be a partner in figuring out how to get fraud out of the Medicaid system, which is, I think, something everybody on both sides of the aisle, definitely the vice president, and definitely we're talking to Republicans in Ohio. Again, this isn't really a partisan thing. This is a Republican-controlled governorship, a Republican supermajority in the legislature. And it was a really honest, difficult conversation about how do you fix this massive, massive Medicaid program. But really cool to be there with Luke and, get out in the field and see the impact of our reporting and just get kind of re-energized that your work and the journalism that we get to do at Daily Wire, which is so important, but it really matters and is making the country a better place.
It was very cool seeing Vivek Ramaswamy, who is very likely the next governor of Ohio, up on stage today, shouting out Daily Wire reporter Luke Rosiak giving him credit for breaking open this apparent example of fraud and abuse in the Medicaid system in Ohio. And I just want to remind our audience, the reason that we're able to do that type of reporting, the reason you have Luke Rosiak breaking wide open these incredible stories, the reason that we have reporters all over the country, in Texas at the border, in Ohio and Kentucky covering this race, in D.C. where Tim Rice is with our D.C. bureau, at the White House where Mary Margaret, our White House correspondent, is. The reason we have all of that is because of our Daily Wire members. And I just want to encourage everyone, if you like the work that we do, if you appreciate our drive to bring you guys the truth, to cut through the noise, to sift through all of the craziness, and just to tell you what's going on in the world, to make sense of the world, and to expose the deep, dark corners of corruption and fraud within our government. If you appreciate all of that, please join our team if you haven't already. Go to dailywire.com/subscribe, become a member. Immediately, you'll be able to hop into our live chat so we can get some of your questions up for our panel. But also, when you do that, you are helping us make a difference. And so I would encourage all of you guys to join our mission here at Daily Wire. Go to dailywire.com/subscribe. All right, we are now getting another batch of votes coming in from Kentucky. We are up now to 7% of the vote in. And look at that. Wow, Ed Gowrine extending his lead over Thomas Massie. He is up now to a 14% lead. We are approaching about 10% of the vote in. Again, 7% right now, so we've still got a ways to go. But Tim, with each batch that's coming in, Gowrine's lead continuing to grow. We still have a number of counties that have not reported, but right now, 14% for Gowrine. What are you seeing on social media? What are you hearing from your contacts as this race starts to crystallize a bit more?
It's Gavin, you said before, if I'm looking down, I'm not just texting, I'm checking things. That's when I'm looking at my laptop to my left here. I just keep looking over. I think that the tide is starting to turn among the DC talking heads. I think now, right, people love to start making bold predictions once we hit, a good enough lead threshold. So I think people are starting to, say it's over for Massie. Social media, remarkably, pretty quiet right now. I think, I don't know, maybe everyone's just eating dinner. Maybe everyone's gearing up. Maybe everyone's watching Wired and Live. I'm checking right now. This is a live read. Thomas Massie hasn't tweeted in 7 hours. I can't imagine Ed Gowrine has tweeted. So, it's, I think we still have a ways to go. On primary nights like this, social media always gets fun, like after the networks start calling it. And that's when one of my favorite things to do on election nights and on primary nights is the second a race is called, I turn on MSNBC or MS Now. I'm sorry, MS Now. Now that it's called that, because I just love to see, especially when Republicans are winning or when it's a Republican primary, I'd love to see what, Rachel Maddow and co have to say about, these things. I spend the entire night of the race, on Daily Wire blogging, following the story for us. And then I get all my postmortem content from the left because it's always just hysterical in both senses of the word.
That was one of the best parts of the 2024 election. I know many in the audience were watching that night. We were all here at Daily Wire HQ watching together. I'll never forget, they called the final battleground state. I believe it was either Michigan or Wisconsin, and that gave it to Donald Trump. And Ben Shapiro, who almost never drinks, said that it was time for us to pop out champagne. We started drinking champagne. We were smoking cigars. Although I should say, the cigars had already been broken out well before that because you can't keep Michael Knowles from smoking Mayflower cigars. But I remember getting home at about 2 a.m, kissing my wife and saying, we did it. And then I was so buzzed, I pulled out my phone and I just spent about an hour watching MSNBC highlights and CNN highlights of them slowly realizing that Kamala Harris would not be the next president. So tonight, if Ed Gowrine does in fact win, which by the way, we're up to 13% of votes and a huge batch just came in. And look at that, Ed Gowrine still maintaining a 14% lead. Tim, every time a new batch comes in, we just jumped up from 7 to 13% live on air, and now 14% lead for Ed Gowrine. But if this lead holds, what can we expect to hear from Democrats tonight? What are they going to be saying on CNN and MSN Now? How are they going to try and spin this?
Let's see. They're going to say that President Donald Trump is anti-democratic. They're going to tell the biggest lie, which is that a president, getting involved in primaries for the party that he leads is somehow meddlesome thumbing the scale, fixing the game, something like that. As we discussed earlier, this is, of course, not the case. Presidents and their political machines, their political operations, the parties that they lead always do this. This president, just as he does in every other aspect of his career and his political life, does it more directly and more brazenly than, he doesn't feel the need to route it through the RNC or sort of do it behind the scenes. So I think that's one of them. I think or the alternative, and maybe both, right? These people, they don't always necessarily just choose one or the other. I think that they might say this is an aberration. President Trump's his influence in this race and in Bill Cassidy's race, doesn't necessarily mean that he has influence for the remainder of the primary. It doesn't mean that Ken Paxton is going to carry the thing, the primary over Cornyn, or if he does, it doesn't mean that he's going to beat James Talarico. And I think that we're also going to get a lot of what we like to say on the political internet, strange new respect for Thomas Massie, right? Thomas Massie cares about the budget. He cares about his district. Thomas Massie is a recent widower. Thomas Massie doesn't want us to get in another forever war in the Middle East. Thomas Massie wants justice for Epstein's victims. Thomas Massie knows that Donald Trump and his friends and inner circle are somehow in the Epstein files, and they're trying to hide that, right? So we're going to get a lot of that. It's going to be this very strange, it'll almost be as if this was a general election and Ed Gowrine defeated a Democratic candidate.
I'm clapping for you. Our audience is clapping for you. Tim Rice, giving that answer while you have a toddler climbing on your lap. See, this is why folks should support the Daily Wire, because other news outlets, we've seen examples of children coming into the shot, and our audience or the guests on those other news outlets, they'll shoo their children away. They'll say, get out of the room. We practice what we preach. At the Daily Wire, we love children. Folks. At the Daily Wire, we say children are a gift and a blessing from God. We have young children. I have 2 young kids at home that would be doing that if I was at home the way Tim is. We love kids at Daily Wire. That is reason enough to subscribe, folks. dailywire.com/subscribe.
Amen.
Every person who subscribes tonight, Tim will have another child, okay, in their honor. And maybe our comment section. I see DW Christie in the chat saying Tim was just fighting for his life right there. Kenny of one, he's being attacked by cuteness. BP Barron, oh, love it. So, Tim, that was absolutely, I would also ask our social media team, pull that clip right now, because that was absolutely adorable. I love that. But let's get back to the results, because we do have more results coming in. In Kentucky, we're still waiting right now, 13% of the vote in Ed Gowrine with a 14% lead. I said earlier that I was doing mental math in my head. Someone pointed out, what other type of mental math is there besides the kind in your head? Thanks, guys, in the comment section for that. But in Kentucky, we do have a race being called. The seat that was the Senate seat left open by Mitch McConnell, who is not running for re-election, has been called for Andy Barr. He has defeated Daniel Cameron, who was the former Attorney General of Kentucky. So Andy Barr, it does look like he will be running. Amy McGrath right now has about an 8-point lead, but that race still too early to call. But Brent, let's get back to you here. If it's Andy Barr versus Amy McGrath in Kentucky, what sort of odds do you give Republicans?
Good. Amy McGrath is, this is not a new candidate. She's been tried many times. She got crushed by Mitch McConnell. She got crushed by somebody else, I think. She's a very, very, very bad candidate. Good on paper, very bad in practice. It's not going to be a good election for Democrats and Amy McGrath.
And Brent,
maybe she'll get the support on the upcoming. I was just thinking about it when Tim was talking about his next, Thomas Massie's next career. I wonder whether the Thomas Massie MTG CNN show endorses Amy McGrath.
Well, it's not a true turn. As a former Republican or a former Republican official, you haven't completed your full character arc until you get the famous New York Times profile where they have you pose in some sort of knit sweater in front of a window. That is when you know that the character arc is fully complete. All right, so we've got the first race there called Andy Barr will be the Republican nominee in the Senate to replace Mitch McConnell. Tim, I'm interested, with Mitch McConnell departing, we know he was a force for so long in the Senate. And there were a lot of folks who said, hey, Mitch McConnell gets a lot of hate. Call him an establishment squish, call him whatever you want, but the man knew how to keep the Senate in line. Obviously, he has not been Senate leader with John Thune taking over in 2024. But do you think that his presence or his lack of presence in the Senate will be felt moving forward?
Before I answer that, I just want to point out one other thing, jumping off what Brent said, which is that, yes, Amy McGrath is a professional political loser. She's one of a handful of candidates like Allison Grimes before her, who just sort of made a career out of running against Mitch McConnell and losing, which she did in 2020. But in 2018, she lost a House race to Andy Barr. So Andy Barr has literally already defeated Amy McGrath for the seat that he currently holds. So that's just a fun little, this will be like a reunion of sorts for the two of them. So I don't think that McConnell's departure is going to be felt very strongly. But the reason I think that is because I think that functionally McConnell departed about 5 months before he announced that he was not going to run he was not going to seek re-election as majority leader, which is to say that, McConnell was, as you said, of course, and I say this I have nothing but respect for Mitch McConnell. He basically transformed the modern Republican Party, was responsible for, he kept Merrick Garland off the Supreme Court, which if nothing else is a career capstone. But it was a combination of his age. He was getting near retirement age. He had a couple of pretty public, like health issues that he was very clearly slowing down, which again, also respect to him, credit to him, unlike every other politician in Washington for knowing when it was to step down. He was falling a little bit out of step with the president. Again, in a more muted way. It's not like he went full resistance establishment, John McCain with the thumbs down, or Bill Cassidy now, saying that he's going to vote against Trump, every which way. But it was just a different time. He was of a different party. He was an institutionalist. He believed in the primacy of the Senate in a way that John Thune, who again I have respect for, is more willing to cede sort of legislative control of his chamber. He's more willing to take cues from the executive branch, right? And I think, again, this is just generational in a certain sense. It's not that Mitch McConnell wasn't happy to take cues from Donald Trump, though he probably had his political disagreements with Donald Trump. It's that Mitch McConnell wasn't going to take his cues from a president, because he was an old school Senate guy who thought that the Senate stood alone and that he was the majority leader. And so he got to call the shots in his chamber, right? No different than any of the great congressional leaders, no different than LBJ when he was in Congress, no different than any other, sort of like major figures that we've seen. So has Mitch McConnell's absence been felt in the Senate? Yes, absolutely. But I really think it was the sort of thing that happened before the electoral changes, him stepping down as majority leader and choosing not to run for re-election, really lagging indicators of a process that had already started a couple of years ago.
Tim, the audience is still buzzing about the appearance of your daughter there. There are also folks saying, can Tim please fix his frame? So this is me reflecting what the audience is demanding. They're asking you to shift your camera slightly. And I'm kind of jealous of how much...
Well, the child disrupted everything.
I'm kind of jealous of how much love you got for bringing your kid in. So on that note, come here, buddy. Hey, come on, hop up. I'm kidding. My son is not here. I'm just kidding. That's a total pump fake there. But guys, there are other races still going on. We're tracking what's happening in Kentucky right now. Ed Gowrine, a 14% lead over Thomas Massie with 13% of the votes in. Andy Barr winning the Kentucky primary over Daniel Cameron. Votes are also starting to come in Georgia. Remember, there is a very tightly contested primary there for the Senate, where in Georgia they will be facing off against Jon Ossoff. And right now we have, 0% of expected votes in. We've got about 300 votes in. But in that race, it looks like it's going to go to a runoff. In Georgia, you've got Mike Collins, the GOP Congress member. You've got former Tennessee football coach Derek Dooley, and also Representative Buddy Carter. In that race, if no candidate gets to 50%, which it looks like that's not going to happen tonight, there will be a runoff in mid-June. And the longer that race goes, the more money that's spent, the more these candidates beat each other up in Georgia, the happier Jon Ossoff is for that Senate primary. We're going to have to let Brent go because he is, traveling through the country right now, covering stories for Daily Wire. So Brent, tell us what we're going to be tracking on the live blog tonight before we let you go.
Yeah, we're going to stay on Massie. And look, I know that Gowrine is far ahead, but there are some districts and states in the presidentials that are always really close. So we kind of know the pattern of where votes come in. Like in Florida, you got to wait for the panhandle. And in Virginia, the Northern Virginia votes come in late. Right now, obviously, Gowron has the lead. But because we've never really watched this district, we don't know the pattern of how they come in. So I'd guess that Gowron isn't popping champagne yet, and they're still kind of on the edge of their seat. But that's still where all my attention is, because you talked about it. Georgia's probably going to a runoff. We know who won the other Kentucky races. This is the one that Donald Trump's going to be tweeting about. It's going to be the lead story on the Daily Wire tomorrow, where we'll be dissecting what happened and why it happened and all the questions we're asking here, like what is next for Thomas Massie, whether he wins or loses. If he wins, is he all of a sudden just still part of the Republican caucus? I mean, a ton of interesting questions. We'll have it all at Daily Wire. Thanks for having me, Cabot. This is awesome.
Brent, thank you so much for tuning in, or for joining us on the show today. I should say thank you to our audience for tuning in. On this Georgia race, I want to point out, you have to get to 50%. Again, there are a lot of national Republicans watching this race, hoping and praying that Congressman Mike Collins gets to 50% tonight, because that would eliminate the need for a runoff. Right now, there's about 3% reporting. He's at 41%. If he can get above 50% again, he would win the primary and face off against Jon Ossoff. If it goes to a runoff, there's going to be a lot more money spent in that race. Right now, Derek Dooley, former Tennessee football coach, he is down at 27%. Earl Carter, Bud Carter at 28%. I'll point out right now in the Georgia race, which we have up on the screen, we have very little reporting coming in from Fulton County, coming in from Forsyth, very little coming in from Cobb County. Those are the suburban areas around Atlanta. That is where Derek Dooley is performing best. And so the Dooley campaign right now, he's down at 27%. They are waiting to see what happens in Fulton, Cobb, Clayton, some of the more, the areas concentrated around Atlanta, because we've seen Collins and Carter perform better in polling, at least in the more rural areas in northern Georgia and down closer to Florida. So that is what we were watching. Also, we had another batch of votes come in from Kentucky. We're up to 14% of the vote in, and look at this, guys. Ed Gowron maintaining a 15% lead right now over Thomas Massie. We are still early, but we got another batch coming in. Oh, that's in Georgia. Sorry, I'm monitoring a bunch of different screens right now. This is what we do here at the Daily Wire. But it looks like this is going to be a potentially a long night. We're only at 16% of the votes in right now. Gowron's lead dipping down to 13.4%. So we could be a ways off from this race being called in Kentucky. But Tim, I'm going to give you the final word before we hand things off to the Daily Wire live blog. Final word on this night. What do you have to say?
President Trump still packs a punch. Georgia primaries are always long, winding, confusing affairs. I'm shocked that there is a football coach in the Georgia primary, but that it's not the guy named Buddy Carter. I mean, come on.
Or Mark Richt.
Like a football player name. That just sounds like a football coach name. No, I mean, look, this is a pretty big night. This as we've been saying the whole time, and it's big for all the reasons that we've been saying. It's kind of a bellwether for the future of the Republican Party, not really in the long term, because it's still very much tethered to Donald Trump's electability and electoral power. Of course, that's not really going to matter 2 years from now. He'll still endorse, but a former president doesn't really carry as much weight as an incumbent president. But more than anything, honestly, this has been the most kind of vibrant, certainly vicious, but vibrant and engaged primary season that we've seen on the Republican side in a while. And I think that's a very good thing. I think I've mentioned this before tonight and other points on this show. I think that what we've seen in the lead up to this midterms, and we're going to continue to see, is a Republican Party that had essentially fallen in line, been remade in the image of, been reformed by, pick whatever good, bad, neutral phrase you want, by Donald Trump, is now beginning to act again like a political party that knows what it's doing. Whereas the Democrats are still very much stuck in the post-Trump, post-Biden, post-Kamala hangover. So, look, it's obviously better when Republicans just support each other and there's a clear winner and there's electoral dominance and super majorities. But that's not how democracy works. Democracy is messy. Parties have to work things out. Primaries can get vicious, but this is better than the alternative, right? This is better than just like a split between the old Republicans and the new Republicans, or just, everyone kind of scrambling to fall in line with one ideology or the other. These are like real gritty political fights. Voters are responding and lawmakers are talking to voters. And that, I think, going into the midterms, going into 2028 is a good sign. It's a sign of life in the Republican Party. I think Republicans should take heart in that, no matter who wins or loses their races tonight.
Well, there's certainly a sign of life right now for Ed Gallrein's primary campaign in Kentucky. We now have 18% of the vote. It's jumped up to 18% in. Ed Gallrein maintaining 19% now, still maintaining a 14% lead. So he is looking good. Decision Desk HQ also has a live tracker on election odds. Their election algorithm has Gallrein with a 98% chance of securing victory tonight. We are going to go ahead and wrap things up for now. Folks can head over to dailywire.com to follow the live blog for all of these races. The primaries down in Georgia. We've got primaries in Alabama that we're tracking, and the big one in Kentucky with Thomas Massie versus Ed Gallrein. Head over there. And I just want to thank our audience for tuning in, especially to our Daily Wire members. Thank you so much for supporting the work that we do. Thank you for making nights like this possible, where we have our run and gun team going out onto the ground. If you're not a member, go to dailywire.com/subscribe. Join our team. Take part in the mission that we are embarking upon as we bring you the news, sift through the noise. This was a special live edition of Wired In Live. We'll see you guys tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern. I'm Cabot Phillips. Thanks for tuning in.